Last time on the Switchy YouTube channel. Switchy soldiered on in his newfound job in Total Drama Critique by taking a look at the third season of the show, Total Drama World Tour. In that video, he went in-depth on some of its crazy hot topics, like the Gwen and Duncan fiasco, Sierra, and Alejandro. Surprisingly, he was pretty nuanced about the whole thing. If you can't tell, that's a joke. In the end, he came to the conclusion that Total Drama World Tour was one of his favorite seasons for its funny jokes and appetite for destruction. He did have a few complaints though. He took issue with some of the interpersonal drama and levels of cartoonish violence. Ironically, that was my favorite part. It's been quite a while since the last Total Drama review. Things have changed, and the next season is going to be a doozy. Will Switchy be able to take on Season 4 successfully as he did the first 3? And more importantly, will it be as long? Find out now on... What's this? Switchy, we have a problem.
What is it? And shouldn't you be doing the recap right now?
Well, I was, but then someone handed me this.
What's that?
It appears to be a budgetary report. It says we're broke.
Broke? What the hell are you talking about?
Yep, broke. We're out of YouTube money.
What? What? I don't believe it. How could this have happened?
Well, there's all those guitars you bought and the vacations. Frankly, I'm appalled at your lack of foresight.
Oh, come on. Stop acting like you're some paragon of frugality.
All that time spent in court over copyright definitely made a dent too.
Oh yeah, that lawyer kind of sucked us dry.
So, what are we going to do?
What do you mean, what are we going to do?
How are you going to do this without any money? It costs money, right?
Well, not as much as you'd think. It's mostly just a lot of work. Well, except for... Oh, crap! No money means...
No animation!
You're a lot taller in person.
Yeah, I know.
So what are we gonna do? We can't leave the recap unfinished.
I know. You're right. The show must go on. But how are we gonna get the money? I think we made enough.
Whew! Alright, let's do the recap real quick, okay?
Yeah, sure. Will Switchy be able to take on Season 4 as successfully as he did the first 3? And more importantly, how long is it going to take? Find out now on the comprehensive roast of Total Drama Revenge of the Island. Cut it before we run out of money again!
You know, this is all just so bizarre. Can you really believe it? Season 4. We're doing Season 4. Isn't that just so weird? I'm making a review of Season 4 of Total Drama. Well, it's what the people want, I guess. Although, interestingly enough, there were a few people who suggested that I don't make this video. A few people told me that I should either skip to Redonkulous Race or just stop entirely because the later seasons of the show aren't worth watching. Which, to me, is kind of ironic. You would think that the worst seasons of the show would make for better material for this series, but... I mean, then again, the title for this series kind of ended up being a misnomer, so... I don't know. That's not necessarily to say that Revenge of the Island is a bad season, by the way. Or is it? Stay tuned. I can't get over this whole Total Drama review thing, honestly. I mean, it's a definite fact that I created and produced the whole Total Drama World Tour video, but there's like a part of me that has trouble comprehending it exists. Like, This entire thing is such a bizarre bullet point within my own life that every other aspect of life just feels absurd to me. Like, no matter what, for some reason it just feels wrong to do anything else now. I'll be like getting groceries and in my own head be like, can you believe I made a 3.5-hour video about Total Drama World Tour? What the heck was up with that? I'll be in line at the bank and suddenly I ponder, none of these people here know that I once made a 3.5-hour Total Drama video. Why am I at the bank right now? It's weird. I don't know if you could relate. Maybe LS Mark could relate. I don't know. It's weird being the Total Drama guy. Like, I'll have people talk to me and tell me that they love my Total Drama videos, which is flattering, but I wish they understood that I do a lot more than just the comprehensive roast of Total Drama. Like, I do so much stuff, like the Total Drama Iceberg and the Total Drama Prison video. I don't want to give off the impression that I'm not enjoying this, though. This series is definitely fun to make, and heaven knows I'm obsessed enough with this show to keep talking about it, but I gotta admit, it can be a little bit worrisome. Some of you guys get mad at me when it comes to this show. Like, really mad. I got a few stray negative comments, especially regarding my enjoyment of Courtney and Sierra as characters, and it is a little bit weird. I can get that not everyone's gonna like them. That's fine, and if you personally don't enjoy them as characters, that's totally okay. I'm not talking about you. But I had some people insult my moral character for saying that I ship Duncan and Courtney, because according to them, they're a toxic and abusive couple. Which, I mean, like, if someone did actually write a 32-page letter detailing the problems they had with their significant other in the same way Courtney did, then yeah, I'll totally denounce that as morally wrong. But in this fictional, hyperbolized, chaotic cartoon world with routine violence and extreme character interactions, well, they're the perfect couple to me, really. In my eyes, Duncan is going to be Courtney's bad boy. He's going to be her man. He's going to be her weekend lover, but he's not going to be her friend. But as I said, you know, it certainly is an opinion thing. Like, Courtney's brand of humor definitely doesn't hit with everyone. Same goes for Sierra. I personally find her hilarious, but I can get that some people might not. Fair enough. Anyway, I think we're ready to just get on with it. It seems to me that we're prepared. I've got the Chris McClane drip, I've got my camera, and I've got the show. That's all I really need. So, without further ado, the comprehensive roast of Total Drama Revenge of the Island. Let's do it.
Apparently, Total Drama Revenge of the Island's official name is Total Drama Revenge of the Island, with a colon. And it's hard to put into words how much I hate this colon. Because of this colon, when you write down the main season names in order, this season and Pakuto stick out and just ruin the vibe. It's sickening. I'm still unsure if I'm keeping the colon or not when titling this video. It's a dilemma that weighs heavily on my soul. One thing I've always found interesting is that Total Drama Revenge of the Island first aired in Canada on January 5th, 2012, only around 8 or 9 months after the World Tour finale aired there. That's a small gap, but it's worth noting that the Canadian airing of World Tour was vastly delayed, by almost 6 months in fact. While the both famous and infamous World Tour finale aired in November of 2010 for us Americans, it did not air in Canada until April of the following year. Poor Leaves. They didn't deserve to have to wait so long. I guess they got their retribution with season 4. As I said, the first episode here aired on Canucks stations in January, while Americans had to wait 5 months until June. And if there's one thing we Americans aren't good at, it's being patient. As a characteristic impatient American, I basically knew the entire elimination order by heart by the time the season finally aired here. I couldn't help myself but read the crap out of the Total Drama wiki. My impatience was accentuated by the fact that I had already been rewatching the crap out of the show at the time, and I was basically in one of my first ever modern Total Drama hyperfixations. I was doing camps, I was looking at fan art, and I was constantly watching those Total Drama character theme song videos. Those videos entirely defined my taste in music for like a year. I can thank Zoe for getting me into Kelly Clarkson. Because of all this research I was doing, I watched the season knowing pretty much all of the major plot events ahead of time. I felt like a psychic compared to the people I knew who were also watching the show because of this. The only problem is that I couldn't actually find the episodes online, so I still had to wait for them to air, but I knew what was going to happen. That felt awesome. Total Drama, thy expert, is here. I don't really know why there were so many disparities in air dates though. By the time Revenge of the Island was being made, there were way fewer differences between the versions aired in different countries.
presumably because Fresh TV was writing and animating it with both American and Canadian audiences in mind. I think they realized how valuable doing that is when they had to sloppily redub parts of the entirety of TDI in order to air it on Cartoon Network. That would not have been fun. You'd have to have a kick-butt attitude like mine to really power through that. If I had to guess, I think that even though the final deliverables for Cartoon Network and Teletoon were more or less identical, there was still a whole TV station bureaucracy that they had to go through to be properly scheduled for broadcast. So they couldn't fit into the exact same time. Maybe. I don't know. Total Drama Revenge of the Island, originally planned to be called Total Drama Reloaded, was a season of a lot of firsts. It was the first season to have an entirely new cast. It was the first season to air in a 16:9 aspect ratio. It was the first season to have only 13 episodes. And oh boy, we'll definitely be talking about that last one. I'm not going to lie. I, along with many fans of the show at the time, had a really hard time stomaching this season. I remember watching it as it came out, and although I could tolerate it while I was watching, it was really disappointing to me for obvious reasons. And if you were watching it around the same time, you almost definitely relate. The new cast was a bitter pill to swallow. I did not like it. At all. I wanted nothing to do with these characters. I couldn't help but look at them like, how dare they replace my beloved original 22 with these half-hearted simulacrums? Total Drama's dead! Dead, I say! Now, was that dramatic? Maybe. Maybe. Though, I feel like at the time, it wasn't a totally uncommon view. I think it's worth noting that when this season was new, the future of Total Drama was a total enigma, and it was easy for me to worry about the worst case scenario. On some level, I genuinely believe that they were done and done with the Generation 1 cast, and that possibility devastated me. After all, in my mind, the show would never be truly complete until Duncan and Courtney got over their whole love triangle, fell back in love, and got married and started a family. Fresh TV needed to do that before they even thought of a new cast.
I remember as a kid thinking that their plan for the next few years was to do Total Drama Revenge of the Island, and then follow it up with sequels to Total Drama Action and Total Drama World Tour. I even thought of a really good mock-up name for Season 5. Total Drama Back in Action. Call me, Fresh TV.
They didn't end up doing this, but I genuinely thought they would. And because of that, I thought that it would be years before we even got to see the original cast compete again. That did not please me. Now, obviously, it isn't fair to be mad at the show for theoretically doing things that they didn't end up doing. It turns out that they weren't going to make us sit through 3 seasons of the Generation 2 cast only, and they brought back older characters to compete in the following season. I was kind of wrong. That being said, I was just a kid, and you have to admit that the end of World Tour being followed by Revenge of the Island stung. I brought this up last year with the World Tour video, but I'll say it again. The last couple of minutes of the Season 3 finale, in my opinion, was incredibly unsatisfying. It was just a sloppily thrown together finish that carelessly cut off the amazing series of events that led up to it, and it had a profound lack of any triumph or satisfaction for anybody. Like seriously, they should not have destroyed the $1 million. I know that sounds like a nitpick, but it's such an anticlimactic screw you to the characters in the show and the connection we've developed with them. There was so much that was left unresolved, and thinking that it may very well have been the last time we would ever get to see our favorite characters compete on Total Drama was heartbreaking, to be honest. And right after that, a new cast. It was a punch in the gut, or it at least felt like one.
But you know, that was over a decade ago. And in recent years, I think people have started to warm up to this season. After all, a lot of the given circumstances that troubled us in 2012 aren't really relevant anymore.
We've had old cast members return, and we've seen, well, attempts to rectify some of the Generation 1 character drama. So really, this season didn't stand in the way of what I thought I wanted. Without the nasty taste of the troublesome transition between 3 and 4, Revenge of the Island goes down a lot easier, I suppose. Or does it? Well, despite everything, I still didn't care much for the new cast as a kid, and although I still watched the season, I didn't come back to it nearly as much as I did its predecessors. There are some people in the community who still insist that once the new cast took over, the show was donezo. Like, they jumped the shark right there. And honestly, I've been sympathetic to them in the past. A while back when I was making the Total Drama Island video, I don't even want to say out loud how long ago that was, I wrote a few paragraphs talking smack about the season as if it had ruined the show beyond recovery, and I regret being so hard on it then. I think the way I criticized it so harshly was partly due to my style of humor back then being a lot more vulgar and hyperbolic, but I also did sort of have a love-hate relationship with the season. I was kind of on the hate end when writing that script, but it would go back and forth. I remember a few months later and during the premiere of that video, I kind of thought to myself, yeah, you know, I don't think it was that bad.
I have to admit though, that a lot of this fluctuation in my opinion of Total Drama Revenge of the Island was me going purely off of memory, because up until making this video, it had been a long time since I last watched Total Drama Revenge of the Island. I could say that I found the season less funny, or the characters less interesting, but that was all based on my experience watching it as a younger teenager.
There's definitely a dip in how much I've watched the seasons after 3. I've probably seen the first 3 seasons at least 15 times each, but going after that, there is a sharp decline. So when I decided to sit down and write this video, I was going in fresh, lemony fresh, froggy fresh. The last time I had sat down and watched all of the episodes of season 4 in order was probably before 2017.
But it's not 2017 anymore. I'm not a little switchlet anymore. Neither are you, dear switcher. Skin wrinkles and hair grays, even for us. My experience with Total Drama has changed profoundly as I've grown into adulthood. Very much so because I developed an audience talking about it on the internet, but past that, I feel like my approach as a critic has changed, and Total Drama Revenge of the Island, despite our previous animosity, deserves a new look. What I want to do is give this season a fair shot. Part of me wants to promise to judge this season completely on its own merits and not related to the previous seasons at all, but frankly, I'm not going to be able to do that. At the very least though, I want to judge this season without immediately discarding it due to stuff like the new cast. We'll see how that goes. But before we talk about the main show, we have to discuss something different, because like always, as a way to streamline the switch between 2 seasons, the writers created a special episode to... Wait, crap. There's no special! This is weird. Like, really weird. Like, I don't know what to do. This isn't right. Like, what do you expect me to do? Start reviewing the source material of a video less than half an hour into the video? Like, what kind of switchy video starts reviewing the source material that early? This isn't a switchy video. This is a scam. That being said, I don't really have anything else to say, so here we are, starting the video. Let's do it.
We've been to the movies. We've been around the world.
TDRI? That's weird. I've always gone with TDROTI, though, now that I think about it, TDRI is a lot more convenient. Huh.
And this season, we're going right back where it all began, at Camp Wawanakwa.
So, as the title suggests, this season takes us back to the original location of the show, Camp Wawanakwa, but it's all run down and it's, different. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they had gigantic squids in season 1.
The rules of the game remain the same. A handful of unsuspecting teens will bunk with complete strangers, air their dirty laundry in our outhouse confessional, and compete in life-threatening challenges all over the island. Speaking of our cast, here they come now!
Woo! Yeah, woohoo! Let's go! What's up, Courtney? What's up? How are you doing? Sierra, I'm digging the backwards cap. Let's give it up for the best reality show cast ever! Oh no! No!
So, unlike the first Total Drama season, which spends a whole episode establishing the cast and game in a very ritualistic way, this episode does it pretty rapid fire. The campers are introduced with just a few lines that demonstrate their front and center personality traits very clearly. Joe and Scott are threatening each other because they're mean. Brick is a military boot camp guy. Lightning is a self-obsessed athlete. And Mike and Zoe's mutual crush is made obvious in like 10 seconds. Like, they're already married, more or less with that kind of gaze. That's a gaze of true love.
Is it just me or is Mike dressed the exact same way as Steve from Minecraft?
Cameron is a skinny indoor person, and Sam is a wicked awesome turbo gamer. To be honest, I definitely prefer the way the characters were introduced more slowly in season 1, but I can also see why they probably didn't want to repeat that this time around. This is a 13 episode season, after all, and honestly dedicating a whole episode of pretty much just dry character humor is not the best strategy for ratings.
Hey there! Dakota here, and I'm here.
And Maria.
Oh, yes. Marcos ought to do it. Oh, whoa! Who said you could pan away? Don't push me, Blondie!
Stacy?
My great Aunt Millie invented suntans. Yeah, before her, people smeared themselves with clay.
Chris McClain, in his increasing criminal sadism, decides not to allow the newbies a comfortable docking at the island, and instead detonates an entire yacht and sends all the cast members flying. And that segues right into this season's theme song. And you know, to be honest, I really like this one. Because the season takes place on the original island, we have a recreation of the original theme song, except there's a bunch of toxic waste and all the characters are replaced with a new cast. And really, this was definitely the best way to do it. It tastefully plays homage to the original cast, but also establishes the new characters in the same way. So, thumbs up from Switchy, Fresh TV. I approve of this theme song you animated like 11 or 12 years ago. We cut back to the campers trying to make it to shore after being victims of attempted murder, and we get more shotgun wedding gags about the characters' very extreme personalities.
Wow, I can't believe I'm actually in the Total Drama Confessional. It's so exciting.
You know, one thing I can't help but notice is that a lot of the characters in this season don't really acknowledge the excitement of being on a famous TV show. I mean, Total Drama is canonically a big deal, but you don't really see any of the characters bring that up, except for Zoe and I think Cameron. I mean, I kind of wish they did. Dakota has the whole thing of hiring people to take pictures of her and pretend she's famous, but that's a bit separate from the show itself. I kind of like how Sierra in last season made a big deal out of being in the game, and I would have liked a little bit more of that.
This is the first time I'm saying this term in like years, but I think this episode is where the whole weirdo syndrome style humor really kicks in. Throughout its runtime, there is a constant stream of jokes with admittedly hit or miss effectiveness that's focused on the bizarre character traits that these characters are centered on. And although I don't think it's the case for everyone, some of it is honestly a bit lost on me. I really do prefer the slower pace of the first season of the show in comparison to this.
I am what's known as a bubble boy. Growing up, my mom was really overprotective, so I've never gone swimming before. Up until 6 hours ago, I've never done anything before, except read and sigh a lot. But that doesn't mean I'm not a force to be reckoned with. No way! Danaeus plexipus, the monarch butterfly?
Just a little sodium chloride.
Actually, dude, it's salt.
That's what I said.
No, dude, you said sodium chloride. Yes, it's the same as salt, but you could have just said salt instead.
One of the things I feel like happens a lot in this season is that when a joke is coming up, you can usually tell what the joke is going to be about. Like, whoa, Cameron is puny. Wow, Stacy's a compulsive liar who just says her ancestors invented everything. Crazy. Yeah, Stacy is a whole conundrum of a character. Like, I don't even know what they were thinking when they made her.
I wish my third uncle twice removed was there. He invented life preservers.
I just don't get it, really.
So stoked to be here. I've been watching Total Drama forever. Who knows, maybe I'll even make some new friends.
Yes, that would be good considering you were an only child and all.
Who told you that?
Your soul reads like an open book. You had such a lonely childhood. It must have been difficult.
Okay, to the show's credit, I have no complaints with Dawn. She's pretty awesome. She's like the Dryad from Terraria. She definitely knows how much the world has been taken over by the corruption in Hallow.
Attention, fresh meat! See the trail leading into the forest? Race to the end of the trail and do not disturb the wildlife. That would be bad.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to upset the bunnies.
I know you don't know about the whole toxic waste thing, Lightning, but there are grizzly bears in this forest. Those are dangerous either way. Chris assembles two teams, the toxic rats and the mutant maggots, and finally lets the cast know about the whole toxic waste thing. It's definitely a bit more out there than what the show used to be like, but I couldn't say it's not an intriguing idea.
Now, this season of Total Drama will be a little bit different. For example, in every episode, someone will be eliminated.
It's never been that hard before.
Objection!
Yes, it has. Season 1 had an elimination in every single episode, with one or two exceptions, but later on in this season, they also have a non-elimination challenge. So, yeah, this is not new.
Regardless, Chris also lets the cast know that he is introducing a new mechanic to the game, the Chris Head, a statue hidden somewhere on the island that gives you a free one-time immunity from being voted off. Naturally, the cast is excited by this.
Is the cleft on my chin really that big?
Yep, and it looks like a butt.
Hey Scott, that's not cool. We love our butt chins here at Switchy Productions. Anyway, the main challenge for this episode is cutting down a totem pole with a bomb attached to it and riding it down a river to the log cabins. The winning team gets their pick of the cabin along with immunity, and it's honestly a pretty short portion of the whole episode. Like, we're already like 2/3 into the runtime at this point. The toxic rats initially get a head start because B, whose main gimmick is never talking, is some sort of 163 IQ genius with a physics doctorate or something. He has all the team members stand on top of each other to reach it and they cut it down. Meanwhile, the mutant maggots are having a lot more trouble, and the stress leads Mike to lose control of his main personality and he becomes Chester, a bitter old man who hates today's youth. Frankly, part of me feels like I'm starting to relate.
Back in my day, we didn't need fancy saws and axes to cut ropes. We did just fine with stone.
Damn, when was your day, Chester? 10,000 BC?
Mike is so sweet. You know, I really don't get his old man comedy routine, but I bet it's really funny if you're from, like, France or something.
I really don't know why, but that line is really funny to me.
The maggots get their totem to fall because some toxic squirrel or something incinerates the tree branch it was hanging off of, and both teams start riding around the same time. It's a dangerous ride though. Chris makes the poor kids go down a waterfall, and after that, we're confronted with a scene I really don't like that much.
Feels good to be back.
Hey, Chris, get this. The boat wouldn't stop.
Oh, look, it's former player Owen, who's not competing this year.
Yeah, so I swam back to tell you that. What? Not competing?
I'm afraid you and the other classic players have outlived your usefulness. Chef?
Really? Outlived their usefulness? Man, I'm sorry, but that's not right. I mean, these characters, we've known them for years, dude. Like, come on, man. Outlived their usefulness. That's messed up, dude. You know what? No, it's not messed up. Everything should be replaced. You know what? Get rid of the original cast of Total Drama. We don't need them. Everything should be replaced. Who cares? Everything old is bad, everything new is good. You know what? I quit! Everyone, this is Switchy 2. He's the new Switchy, because you know what? I've outlived my usefulness. I'm done! Here's your script.
What is this?
Your script.
What
Read
do you
it.
mean? What do you mean my script?
Your script.
What is
You
this?
read it.
Where am
Read
I?
the script.
Okay.
Right after Owen gets nuked off the island, the toxic rats make it first to the campsite and successfully deliver their totem pole. But the maggots arrive right after, but don't make the delivery in time, and their totem detonates and destroys the good cabin.
As the only team with a cabin still standing, the mutant maggots win the first challenge.
Yay!
Wait, that doesn't even make sense. The rats were the only ones who brought their totem back.
It's even more bizarre that the rats don't complain about this. What does the cabin have to do with it? Like, I'm genuinely perplexed by it. Anyway, we cut to our first elimination, and Stacy is the one who gets the boot. Personally, I would have probably voted for the second best kids show Paris Hilton parody, given she was completely ignoring the challenge and posing for her fake paparazzi. But at the same time, Stacy is really, really annoying. In this season, the losing contestant is gifted a radioactive toxic mushroom, and when Stacy catches it, all of her hair falls out.
She's bald!
Bald.
What do you think I mean, bald? Bald! Bald! She's bald! She's bald!
You know, maybe this is just a nitpick, but I really don't like this, especially how she barely even reacts to all of her hair falling out. I've seen girls look more sad when they've broken their nails. Like, I've gone bald a few times before in my life, and it was my decision, but even then, it's still like an experience. I especially dislike how much this devalues the penultimate episode of season 1. Remember when Heather had her head shaved and it felt like the end of the world? How thematic it was that her vanity ended up being her downfall after playing such a cutthroat game. Yeah, compared to this, it feels like night and day. You're gonna have to get used to me saying stuff like that in this video.
I guess it's the dock of shame for me then.
Actually, we came up with something new this season. You'll love it. Say hello to the Hurl of Shame.
I feel like a catapult is overkill. They probably could have just returned to the boat of losers and it would have been fine.
Like, I suppose on some level it seems arbitrary, but I think it's kind of indicative of how far the whole Acme Looney Tunes violence in this season goes. In the case of an obvious filler character like Stacy, having a goofy send-off like this isn't really a big deal. But one of the things you and I will notice in this season is that there aren't really any character exits like that of Courtney, Harold, or Katie, because the gigantic friggin' catapult sort of kills any serious tension built up.
All right, joke's over. Time's up.
Hey, man.
You're done. I want you out. I made my point. This is just a little gag thing. It's over. You're done. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Episode 2 opens up the morning after Stacy's elimination. Scott returns to the rat's cabin covered in dirt. His cabin mates understandably ask him where he was, and he lies that he was out making out with one of the girls on the island. What Scott was actually doing was looking around the island for the invincibility statue and getting in a few tussles with the wildlife in the process.
All right. I was out looking for that hidden immunity idol. Not that they need to know. It's all part of my strategy. Let my team lose so the maggots develop a false sense of security before I pick them off.
You know, I never really found that to be a very good strategy. Putting yourself at a numbers disadvantage is really risky, and I have trouble believing it's somehow going to inflate the opposite team's egos enough for there to be any reasonable results. That being said, I feel like I've been a little bit too hard on this as a motivation in the past.
One of the most interesting things about Scott, though, is that he is heavily inspired by the real-life Survivor candidate Russell Hantz. Both Scott and Hantz are known for their focus on the immunity statues throughout their stints, along with their unorthodox strategies that involve throwing challenges. Although I've never watched Survivor, I do find that to be really interesting. I used to think that they just gave him the throwing games trait as a not-so-graceful attempt of making him different from characters like Heather and Alejandro, but it turns out their intentions were a bit more complex. So, you know, kudos, Fresh TV. I suppose I misjudged you.
Really? Oh no! Will you keep it down? If I don't get my beauty sleep, I'll lose it. Yes, because your need for fame is really a depressed cry for love. Who told you that? My therapist? I see people's auras, and it looks like someone threw up on yours.
She's a simple character, but like, it works. It works.
You know, so far this episode is really great. I really like seeing the morning routines of a lot of the campers here, and the fact that it's outside of the framework of the challenge is nice to me. It contrasts heavily with a lot of the rest of the season's writing, in a good way.
Just did my morning 5K run. You?
8K.
I mean, I did an 8K warm-up, then 5K at a full sprint.
My entire run was uphill.
Yeah, uphill with my eyes shut.
I ran backwards with earplugs.
I had a bowl of nails for breakfast this morning, without any milk.
The challenge is super interesting as well. It's pretty simple in premise. Chris reads off something embarrassing done by one member of each team, and the member can choose to either own up to it or have themselves and their entire team get dunked. Add on the fact that there's a mutant walking shark named Fang underwater, and you have good motivation to tell the truth.
If a team gets dunked, their opponents can steal by guessing which donkey is guilty.
But yeah, man, I'm really loving this. It efficiently builds on the cast while also moving the plot forward. It's pretty funny, too.
But then, like, all the cast members just start complaining and refuse to do the challenge. So they don't. And instead of the actually interesting secrets challenge, we get a silly, fun, gross obstacle course relay race. Wow, look, they get to get hit with cannonballs. Oh, gross, Try jumping on butt. Oh look, the maggot is all gooey and sticky. Gross, donk. Okay, maybe my dumb guy laughing is a bit on the nose, but I can't help but acknowledge this profound gap I feel between my enjoyment of this type of humor and the amount the show expects me to enjoy. I'm not saying I'm some profound genius who is above gross out humor and slapstick. I'm not. But this episode leans on it to an extent where I remember being almost offended by it as a kid.
I know that sounds ridiculous, and it is, but I can't help but remember being a kid and watching this scene and being profoundly not affected by its attempts at making me laugh.
I don't know, even now when I watch the 90-second introduction to this challenge, I find myself rolling my eyes a little bit. It shouldn't be a big deal, but I guess I just have particularly bad memories with this part. Maybe it's because this is when the whole total drama will never be the same thing truly sunk in for me all the way back then. Or maybe they really did something wrong here. Part of me thinks that I just grew fatigued with this scene especially because they use the crap out of it in the show's commercials and promos. I mean, geez. I suppose there's probably market research to back up this strategy, but the only thing they ever advertised about this show was the wacky, silly slapstick. That's all they ever wanted us to know. The campers were getting the crap beaten out of them. They loved this one clip of Brick getting hit with a cannonball. That was always in the commercials. You could not watch an hour of Cartoon Network without seeing that same clip 3 or 4 times. I suppose at Cartoon Network, that was the crown jewel of Total Drama Revenge of the Island. Brick getting hit with a cannonball. Yeah, that's what we came for. That's what we all came for. Looking back on it, I don't really think this scene did anything profoundly offensive or bad, other than just maybe being drawn out a little longer than it should have. If I had written this episode though, I definitely would have emphasized the secrets challenge, because personally, I find that to be a much more interesting concept. I think I just have some bad blood with it due to the fact that it's such a good example of how often this season forgoes any serious or dialogue-driven storytelling, just for gross out humor or slapstick. I guess it's worth noting that we are introduced to a new alternate personality here, Svetlana, who is an Eastern European gymnast and acrobat. She's a pretty useful asset in these kinds of challenges. Anyway, the toxic rats end up losing this challenge, and they primarily blame Dakota, mostly because she was never focusing on the challenges and instead just posing for her fake paparazzi that Chris keeps trying to kill. Sam is a little bit defensive of her, mostly because he has a not-so-secret crush on her, but he's kind of the odd one out.
A great darkness is surrounding Dakota. If she stays on the island, disaster will befall her.
Hey, Dawn. Hey, foreshadowing is my job, okay, honey?
So yeah, Dakota gets voted off and takes the hurl of shame.
Man, I can't believe Dakota's gone. I was ready to repeatedly ask her out and get turned down all season.
The next episode is known as Ice Ice Baby, which is one hell of an overhated song. I mean, it's corny, yeah, but I remember on like 2 or 3 occasions learning copyright law at school as a kid, and they would always use this example of Vanilla Ice infringing on Queen's copyright. Frankly, I'm definitely of the opinion that sampling is too legally restricted in this country, and the way we categorize quote-unquote original ideas is goofily blind to the actual creative process. Like, pretty much everything is a ripoff of something else. Entire genres have essentially been built off of borrowing ideas from other types of music, and the whole process of legally obtaining rights to use musical ideas is questionable.
It's honestly ridiculous. You have artists coming out and making some of the most acclaimed records of the decade in the red because of all the samples and royalties they have to clear, and... Wait, what was this video about again? Total drama.
The first half of the challenge in this episode is located at what is known as Mount Looming Tragedy, a gigantic butte in the middle of the forest. You'd think that they would have used that at some point in the first season, but I guess they decided not to. The challenge is a pretty simple premise. They need to race to the top, and if they want, they can look through a junkyard guarded by a gigantic mutant beetle that breathes fire for anything useful.
Yeah, I'll stick to free climbing.
It's an alright sequence, I suppose. It suffers from the same issue as a lot of the physical challenge bits do in the season, and that issue is predictability. Like, you're never really surprised by what joke they make with each character. You could guess what's going to happen, and most of the time, you're going to be right. Like, wow, Cameron can't get anywhere because his shirt is heavy. Wow, Brick ends up hurting himself while trying to look strong. Sam compares the challenge he has as a made-up video game but completely fails at it. Riveting. But at the same time, I do think it was funny when Joe made fun of Anne-Maria's hair as a means of tricking her into participating in the challenge, and it was also funny how her hairspray poof is somehow solid enough to completely break gigantic cubes of ice on impact.
Anne-Maria seems like the kind of character that would be completely one note and totally insufferable, but Honestly, she's really funny, especially in this episode.
The toxic rats end up winning the first part of the challenge because Dawn is able to play Beetle Whisperer and Bee builds a makeshift rocket out of some of the scraps they found. But because Scott had some initial doubt about the whole thing and paid the price, he begins to target Bee in his next episode of Sabotage.
Time for part 2 of today's challenge. Capture the snow fort. To win, you have to either demo the enemy's fort or capture their flag and bring it back to your own fort.
Exposed.
Rats won the first part, so they get first dibs on the forts.
Scott convinces his team to use the crappy fort by telling them that it was probably a trick, and he clearly miscalculated the whole thing. Like, dude, that's putting a target on your back. I suppose that's why he goes so hard on pinning the blame on the others in this challenge. The teams are both given a bunch of snowballs stuffed with mysterious objects. Some will be beneficial to them, some not so much, and that whole bit is used pretty well.
No, I'm not gonna listen to the snowball. I'm gonna chuck it.
But it's full of negative energy.
So am I.
You weren't held enough as a child.
Yeah, you know, this act is honestly hilarious. The physical humor is creative and the concept is novel and memorable. I'm honestly really liking Jo in this episode and how she keeps tricking Anne-Maria into participating, and it's even made funnier when Anne-Maria accidentally does really useful things.
Whoa! Remember her? She organized your family reunion. Don't hurt us, hurt them.
I didn't know you were a beetle whisperer.
You know, I don't really remember having any strong opinions on this as a kid, but I really ship those two now. They're hilarious together, especially in this episode. Like, I want to see them married, spending the rest of their lives together. They're soulmates.
Bee finds a particularly reflective sheet of ice and starts to use it to direct sunlight at the maggot fort, while Mike turns into Svetlana to catapult himself all the way to the rat's fort. Sadly for Mike, his shirt gets ripped off in the process and he turns into Vito, a stereotypical tough guy Italian. Anne-Maria has quite the thing for him. The thing is, Vito doesn't really know or care what's going on, so he doesn't try to take the flag he got back to his home fort. Meanwhile, the maggot's fort is almost completely melted. Because of all this, Scott makes a last-ditch effort to throw the challenge by discreetly redirecting Bee's sheet of ice back on his own fort, which immediately melts it and the toxic rats lose. Scott convinces his team to vote for Bee by telling them he was sabotaging the team, which honestly seems a bit flimsy. If I were trying to blame Bee, I would have framed it as a means of incompetence rather than malice, but whatever. Right before Bee gets voted off, Dakota hang glides back onto the island to try and get back into the game, which Chris promptly denies. Well, that is until he gets a call from Dakota's dad offering money, and he ends up deciding to let Dakota back, but as an intern. And yeah, the whole spoiled rich girl wishes on a monkey's paw to become an unpaid laborer bit is pretty funny. So Bee takes the boot, and for one time and one time only we hear him make a noise. He screams for his life while being launched to who knows where. Episode 4 starts out like a lot of episodes, with one major exception. It takes place at night. The campers are going to do a challenge at night. They're going to be picked off one by a gigantic spider monster at night. Brick's going to pee his pants at night.
You know, we're really going above and beyond with the SpongeBob references in this video, and it was completely coincidental, by the way. Like, I didn't really go in expecting to do this.
I have a severe case of arachnophobia. Spiders are just so creepy. Literally. Anything with that many legs must be evil. Ugh.
In a nutshell, they have to go to select locations on the island and look for spooky souvenirs while also trying to avoid the mutant spider, which I would say is easier said than done, but it doesn't sound that easy in the first place. The first area of interest is a gigantic tree occupied by a mutant giant squid creature, and I gotta say, that's kind of a creative idea. The rats are the first to the location and Lightning manages to take it down, and he gets the first souvenir. Sadly, he and Don both get caught in the process, leaving only Sam and Scott on the team. The maggots make it to the tree after the rats do, but because the tree squid thing has already been dealt with, Joe just throws Cameron up to get the key. However, Zoe gets caught by the spider in the process and Mike runs off trying to find her. This leads Brick and Joe to have an argument over whether they should just go on without their missing team members. Joe's more ends justify the means mindset conflicts with Brick's cadet code of never leave a man behind, something he's stuck to fiercely ever since military school. The second souvenir stop is a pet cemetery that apparently exists on the island. It's certainly spooky, and it's also totally rigged with booby traps. Brick gets caught in a pitfall, and that leads him to, Yeah.
I just want to point out that this is the second time Brick has peed his pants in this episode. I think that's worth acknowledging.
Scott keeps intentionally trying to sabotage his own team, but in the process, he and Sam both get disrupted by all of Chris's crazy booby traps. Sam gets caught in a hole filled with kitchen grease that Dakota put there, and she almost apologizes to him, but doesn't. She's developing a heart, but it's still pretty small, I suppose. Mike continues looking for Zoe until he accidentally has his shirt torn off, and that awakens Vito once again. And that excites Anne Maria quite a bit.
Whenever we're alone, he drops the whole Mike act. It's because he can't get enough of me.
Part of me thinks Anne Maria's delusions are a bit, well, delusional, but I find the love triangle this creates between her, Mike, and Zoe too interesting to really complain about it.
However, Vito and Anne Maria's joyous reunion doesn't do much good for the maggots, as they run off alone to make out, and that completely staggers the team. Jo insists on moving forward on her own while Cam goes to find them.
Guys! Come on! Jo and me found where we have to go next! Guys? Ew! Come on! That's not what Chris meant when he said to stick together.
I don't think this is the kind of action Chris had in mind.
I think Cam and Duncan would be good friends.
While Cameron goes off on his own, Jo gets caught by the spider. Fortunately for her, though, Cameron makes his way back to the cave to reunite. Cameron leads what's left of the maggots into the final souvenir, but he gets caught by the spider. Sam and Scott get caught right after, meaning all that's left are the Jersey Shore lovebirds. However, Vito doesn't really care about the whole challenge, and he just continues doing his own thing. Anne Maria kisses him in front of Zoe, and that leads us into some interesting drama. We have characters in conflict with each other.
Sorry, Red. Looks like Vito's only interested in classy girls. I thought Mike was interested in me.
Zoe?
Yes?
Spider!
Seeing Zoe in her perilous situation, Vito turns into Mike, who then turns into Svetlana to make his way up to the gigantic spider web. Sadly, she gets caught as well, but she did save Brick in the process. Brick initially tries to free everybody else, but Jo tells him to just go for the finish line and leave the rest of them. Sam, much to Scott's self-sabotaging dismay, attempts to make it to the finish line as well, despite, being almost completely immobilized. Brick makes it to the finish first, but the maggots lose. Why? Well, he left his teammates behind, which is poetic in a way.
How could she have done this? Izzy is the only returning cast member who takes her job as challenging nuisance seriously. Not only is she the opposing force in this challenge, but she's also integral to how the plot plays out. First off, we're told by Chris that the spider is on the loose, and I don't think this means Izzy is AWOL, but it does mean she can choose who she attacks and when she attacks. She takes out Dawn first as she doesn't want her to spoil her role. I mean, the only reason we know it's Izzy is because an accident happened and the spider costume fell off. She wasn't supposed to reveal herself. But Dawn can sense people's auras, allegedly, and more than that, she can sense animals, even the radioactive ones. If Dawn managed to get close to the spider without getting caught, she would have immediately figured out it wasn't Izzy by sensing the aura and realizing it wasn't actually an animal. She'd know it was Izzy. She could also potentially out Izzy for the evil mastermind she is, and while Izzy isn't competing this season, she doesn't want that. I mean, her suit is decked out. When the suit falls apart, we see the little contraptions she used to shoot webs, but this doesn't explain how she managed to puppeteer multiple limbs by herself. Izzy's just built different. They also gave her night vision goggles to make her unstoppable. And she is unstoppable. Izzy could have easily captured every single contestant, but she chose not to because that's not her purpose. She's not here to win. She's here to make the show more interesting, to push the challenge along. If she catches everyone, there's no challenge. By extension, there's no show. She's making the show more entertaining, something she's been striving to do since the beginning. Let me ask you, what are the three most important plot lines in this episode? Brick abandoning his code of honor and suffering for it, Scott manipulating Sam to side with him and lose on purpose, and Mike kissing Anne Maria right in front of Zoe. Izzy immediately targets Dawn and Lightning and then doesn't go after any other rats until the very end. She puts Scott and Sam together alone, only those two, for the majority of the episode because she knows. She watches the show. She knows the contestants. She's seen the confessionals. As a gamer, I thought you'd understand. Once she switches gears to the maggots, she immediately targets Zoe. She separates Mike and Zoe and then isolates him with Anne Maria. I mean, maybe there's no way she could have known he would become Vito, but if Cameron and Scott can figure out Mike's triggers, I'm pretty sure Izzy can by having all the footage. I mean, not only does Mike just straight up admit it in his audition tapes for the show, the audition tapes are important, but also she's the first one to discover Mal in the next season. Sorry, I didn't mean to spoil your next roast, if you're even gonna watch this. I wouldn't. It just happens to work out that way. She can't control when Mike loses his shirt, but she can control one thing. Zoe. Izzy is pretending to be an actual dangerous spider, but she's not actually gonna hurt anyone. Her job is to capture them to set up drama, hence the name of the show. But then for no reason, something that has not happened anywhere throughout the episode, and now we know that she's not a real spider, doesn't make any sense. At the end of the episode, when they're all webbed to the ceiling, the spider starts menacingly crawling towards Zoe. It seems like no reason at first. But then, Zoe cries out in fear, which we know that triggers Mike to come back because it's already happened multiple times in the series thus far, so we can assume Izzy also knew that. It happened a couple times already, and we're only on episode 4. She triggers Vito to turn back into Mike to then annoy Anne Maria and lose them the challenge. But then out of nowhere, Cameron manages to break out of the webs, which he attributes to adrenaline, which I don't buy at all. I could buy that Cameron could break out of a spider web if it was just him, but he's in the same web, wrapped in the same material as Lightning and Joe. I don't believe that he could break out if those two couldn't. Unless, of course, whoever was webbing them purposefully tied his a lot looser and weaker. But what kind of evil mastermind would do that? Because as soon as Cameron goes after the spider on the attack, the spider goes limp. Spider doesn't fight back. And we know it's Izzy in there, and we know Izzy is an expert fighter. And she's not fighting back. She just takes it. She's messing with this poor Bubble Boy's head. That's all well and good, you know, she messed with a bunch of people, that was her plan. But you wanna know the craziest part of her plan? The challenge ends with Brick losing for his team because he broke his own code and left his men behind. Scott has been purposefully losing every challenge up until this point. He would not willingly help Sam win. The only reason Brick loses the challenge for his team is because Sam and Scott cross the finish line because they're tied together with webs. You know who tied them together with webs? Izzy. Brick is transferred to the other team, doubts himself, there's friction between Mike and Zoe, and Sam believes Scott is the only one he can trust because they won the challenge and they were left alone the whole time, all because of Izzy. I rest my case. Sorry for wasting all your time so early into this video. I just heard the name Izzy and I flew over here as fast as I could like Batman, but more annoying. So Batman. Anyway, back to you, Total Drama Guy.
Thanks, Total Drama Guy.
The mutant maggots make their way to the campfire to determine who is going home.
Permission to speak? I volunteer for elimination. I don't deserve to stay. I did not follow my own code.
Huh, no kidding, Sir Leaks-a-Lot.
So I'm afraid of the dark. That's what night vision goggles are for. You'd never make it in my squadron.
You know, Brick, I could be wrong, but I have trouble believing Canadian military school is that intense. Being the ace cadet in Canadian military school is like being the prom king in the short bus. Like, I've played Civilization 6 before, and the only thing the Canadian military does there is found national parks. I have way too much time in that game. Way too much. I mean, think about all the things I could have done in life other than play Civilization 6. I'll never get that time back.
Anyway, as the Total Drama Guy said, this isn't an elimination challenge and whoever gets the boot just joins the other team. It's sort of suspicious though that the first time the maggots lose is also the first and only time this season has a non-elimination episode. This is Team Amazon all over again. Episode 5 opens up with some morning antics going on in the cabins. The rat gentlemen are having trouble adjusting to the new team member, especially because he insists on subjecting all of them to his absurdly loud alarm clock.
Man, my ears haven't rung like that since I played Guitar Band 9 on Maximum Rockness.
Guitar Band 9 on Maximum Rockness. Jeez, whoever wrote that line has probably played like 2 video games in their entire life.
Meanwhile, in the maggots cabin, Cameron is revealed to have figured out that Mike has dissociative identity disorder and has been keeping notes on all of his observations thus far. Honestly, that's kind of cool. Back in the rat's abode, Lightning gets hungry and opens up his protein powder bucket, I think that's what they're called, and is devastated to find out that someone has stolen all of it. Sam doesn't really care that much, and Scott suggests that Brick might have stolen it, because his arrival into the team coincided with the case of the stolen protein powder. That being said, it is Scott, so consider cui bonos from this whole event.
All right, here to help us get today's competition underway, say hello to one of our classic competitors, Bridget.
Whoa, hey, it's Bridget! Oh, it's so cool. I love seeing old cast members cameo in this season, and where'd she go? Was that it? Really? That's all she came for? Well, okay, I guess.
The first part of the challenge is having one member dive underwater in an old school scuba suit to retrieve jet skis for the team while everyone else pumps them oxygen. Joe volunteers, or, well, commands that she dive for the maggots, while Scott makes Brick dive for the rats. Things go well at first for the rats, but while Mike sloppily tries to explain why he kissed Anne-Maria to Zoe, she accidentally stands on the air hose, depriving Joe of air. This leads to a fight between Anne-Maria and Zoe, and the scuffle somehow has Mike's shirt ripped off, which, well, is probably not what he wanted to happen at that given moment. Zoe isn't pleased and storms off. While the challenge continues, it's revealed that Joe's whistle has disappeared along with Scott's lucky shark tooth. Scott continues to insist Brick is doing it to just mess with everyone, and Anne-Maria has trouble believing it until she realizes her hairspray has disappeared. Down below, Brick wins the first half of the challenge for the rats, but not really in an elegant or admirable way. It was more of a happy accident. In between the challenges, we see Dawn and Zoe playing hooky, and they have a really interesting conversation.
Don't worry, Zoe. You won't be lonely forever.
Oh, hey, Dawn. Well, tell that to Anne-Maria and Mike. Or should I call him Vito?
Trust me, Mike likes you a lot.
How can you be so sure?
It's all over his aura. The Mike parts of it, anyway.
Really? Wait, what do you mean, the Mike parts?
Hey, what the hell are you guys doing? We're in the middle of a challenge. If we lose this, I am so voting you off.
Jokes aside, this scene is great. There's no pace-breaking jokes or anything, and I think it does a stellar job at moving Mike and Zoe's arcs forward. I especially like the Mike parts line. That's the best kind of foreshadowing.
Honestly, I'm finding myself really enjoying Dawn here. And I can't help be puzzled with the fact that I don't really remember caring about her that much as a kid. Because rewatching this, she is evidently my favorite character in the season, without even a shadow of a doubt. So, I don't know. I suppose it might be because the whole armchair Freudian aura reading thing kind of went over my head as a kid, but I'm not sure.
Part 2 of the challenge, a death-defying water ski race. The goal? Be the first to ring 4 bells on these 4 totally harmless buoys.
Oh, hey, look, Bridget's back. Nice. Man, I love Bridget. She's such an underappreciated character. That's it? That's all we're getting? Not even a single line of dialogue? Okay, then.
Each team is given a boat equipped with a cannon that shoots mutant rattlesnake seagulls. I don't really get why the cannons are equipped with rotating barrels when they are only equipped with 3 seagulls, but whatever. It's honestly a pretty fun challenge. The physical comedy is good, and I enjoyed the ways the characters would solve problems. You can see Cameron getting more sure of how to trigger Mike's alternate personalities to come out, which is cool, although it's certainly ethically ambiguous. Joe takes a shot at the rat's boat and hits lightning while driving, and the seagull venom makes him go unconscious. Scott is a big fan of this development. The rat's boat stops, but Dawn quickly puts together a plan to catch up.
Everyone, calm down. I have a plan. Sam, you drive.
Woohoo! Just like playing speedboat runner on my Swede.
If we pass a McDaniel's or a Burger Queen, let's hop out. Oh, that's right, we're on television.
Oh, I'd love a flame-broiled bopper.
Brick, we'll have to ski with lightning.
Affirmative.
Scott, don't you dare fire any more of those defenseless gulls.
Promise. Starting now.
They're in love. They're going to be married one day.
Dawn's plan works pretty well, actually. It definitely helps that the maggot's seagull gun got jammed and stopped working. Things were going so well, in fact, that Scott had to shoot the driver like Joe did earlier in his attempt to lose. His plan works, but there ends up being a little hiccup. Or, well, the hiccup is that there's at least one person on his team that wasn't an idiot. Dawn remembers that Joe's gun was jammed and realizes that Scott intentionally threw the challenge. However, Scott gets wind of her plan to expose him to the others and counteracts by framing her for stealing everything. Because, he was the one who stole everything. I'll give you a second to take in that utterly insane plot twist. Although I definitely do like how they still show him using the tooth throughout the episode, even though it was allegedly stolen. That's honestly a clever detail. He slips all the stuff he stole into her garbage bag that she uses to collect shells and shows it to the others. Honestly, I feel like using a plastic trash bag is a bit off character for Dawn.
I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, though. Scott is only doing this because he loves Dawn and wants to relieve her of the stress the game is causing her. And Dawn is only trying to tell on him because she doesn't want her soulmate to be a dishonest person. This is canon. They are desperately in love.
Following campers are momentarily safe. Brick, Sam, and the artist formerly known as Buckethead.
That was a weird pop culture reference.
Dawn gets voted out, but she attempts to deflect her elimination by using the Chris McClane invincibility statue, only to find out that it was a fake made by Scott. Oof, way to rub in the burn, man. Also, it's worth noting that Scott calls Dawn a fairy princess, and the only reason I'm bringing it up is because I wish he would have called her that a lot more often. Seriously.
I knew the universe wouldn't want me to win such a perverse game.
Perverse. I like that.
But what the universe does want me to do is sell these discarded TDR keepsakes on Craigslist so I can start a sanctuary for all the poor mutant creatures on this island.
If you don't like the crispy-licious taste of Let's, feel free to eat that other greasy brand.
Splingles? Not this guy.
Thank you, Troy.
And to my fellow victims of reality television, I urge you to rise up against the soulless, sociopathic scoundrel hiding among you.
Soulless sociopathic scoundrel. That's good. Better write that one down.
Chef?
The traitor in your midst is... Wait! I have to warn my teammates!
You know, honestly, Dawn, I don't think you would have gotten anything done even if you were allowed to talk. Explaining what Scott did would have to take at least a couple of minutes, and given that your team is too stupid to already tell that Scott is malicious, I don't think there's any hope for them.
So anyway, Dawn gets the boot. Unfortunate, but I guess someone has to. Still though, I like this episode. Good job, Fresh TV. You get the switchy seal of approval for this one. The next episode has the campers involved in a fashion challenge, which, frankly, this show has a pretty good track record with that kind of stuff based on last season.
Fashion, now you're talking. Fashion, waste of time.
So says the girl in men's prison sweats.
Hey, nobody needs to be reminded that I'm a girl.
I know Twitter's gonna have a field day with that one.
However, there are a few twists. The campers have to capture one of the crazy mutant creatures on the island and somehow force them to do the honor of modeling. Obviously, the teenagers struggle to get their hands on an animal, and honestly, the visual comedy that comes with all these crazy animals is pretty funny. Like, I'm pleasantly surprised, especially because the humor in this episode specifically tends to go a bit further than just an animal with absurd firepower. I found the beaver anglerfish thing to be a highlight. I also want to add on here, because I haven't brought it up yet, that I genuinely like the whole Scott-Fang rivalry. There's still an aching part of me that kind of thinks it's a little too fantasy for my own tastes, but the whole bit where Scott lures Fang into one of his own traps unironically enthuses me. Also, it's nice that the show has gotten to the point where they're willing to animate pizzas being eaten in more than one bite. Despite the teams being given, like, a ridiculously low figure to capture an animal and completely dress it. Actually, no despite. How do you expect them to do that in 10 minutes? I seriously wonder why they insisted on making the time figure so short. Like, this act of the episode would be no different and a little bit more believable if Chris told them they had an hour. It's not really a big deal, but it's kind of hard to believe that Brick was able to engineer an explosive duffel bag that instantly clothes whoever is close enough to its explosion radius in that amount of time. Like, what? Brick's whole fashion bomb thing, with suspension of disbelief, is a good idea, but according to Sam, his choices for clothing are a little too functional. Sam goes off to get fashion advice from Dakota because, well, according to Sam, she's quite well put together.
You want my advice? Really? No one ever asked me for my advice. Sure, I'd be happy to help.
Wow. Dang, I kind of feel bad for her. You know, there are occasional bits and pieces about Dakota feeling neglected throughout the season, but they never really amount to much. I think there was a big missed opportunity there.
Anyway, Dakota gives Sam the gift of her killer fashion instinct, and she lets him in on the next big thing. Stripes.
What?
Stripes! Of course! Thanks, Dakota, you're an angel!
Both teams end up getting their models on the stage. Somehow. Frankly, it's miraculous. The judges for the walk-off include the classic Chris McClane, the illustrious Chef Hatchet, and the internet's busiest fashion nerd, Anthony Fantano.
This gorgeous plus-sized maggot is showing off a bold retro fashion like no other. Her swank new hairdo perfectly complements a dynamite vintage 60s go-go dress.
Little gross, what with the oozing and squirming. I give it an 8.5.
Yeah!
I'm feeling a light to decent 8.
Okay, show me what you got, rats.
As you can see, Yeti is wearing a smart bohemian striped ensemble. The outfit consists of a variety of garments applied forcefully to random parts of his body.
Oh, yeah. Damn, boy. Damn, boy, he's thick. Boy, that's a thick-ass boy. Damn.
Ew, horizontal stripes. Sam, I meant vertical stripes. Horizontals just make you look fat.
They do?
The Sasquatch in Aqua kidnaps Anthony, steals Chris's jetpack, and flies all the way to Boney Island. As a result, Chris forces the campers to go on a critic rescue mission. So everyone grabs their canoes and makes their way over, and Sam seems to not be doing so well. He's gone so long without playing video games that he starts to disconnect with reality, and he begins to see everything as a visually inaccurate world of pixels. Like, those pixels are not the same size. That's so unrealistic. The teams arrive at the island, and Scott hatches a little devious plan.
Chris is gonna merge the teams any day now, so it's time to start working on the maggots. Zoe's ripe for the plucking, and you ask anybody on the farm back home, I'm a great plucker.
Scott, are you okay?
This is all my fault.
What do you mean?
My team voted off Dawn behind my back, and she's the only one who could talk to that big ape.
Anthony Fantano.
He is doomed.
Oh, don't blame yourself.
Come on, does she really believe that? Really? Sorry, I'm just not buying Scott as a good liar. The campers make their way to a bunch of scaffolding and they see Anthony Fantano giving the Sasquatch in Aqua a pep talk. For some reason, everyone refers to it by just calling it a Yeti in this episode. Probably because even though Sasquatch in Aqua is the canon name, it's kind of a mouthful.
What's with all the scaffolding?
I'm turning Boney Island into my personal resort. The health department said it was unfit for human life, but I sent in workers anyway.
Wow, that's dark. You know, someone should really make a video highlighting Chris McLean's crimes and the consequences he should face for them. And everyone watching this video should watch that video as well.
Anthony Fantano tells the campers not to hurt the Yeti because he's just insecure about his body. And then we get a clip of Jo mumbling to herself that she can relate with that, but she immediately backs off and tries to cover up what she said.
This episode has a habit of hinting at certain internal struggles the characters have that get swept under the rug later on. It's kind of a shame, to be honest. Characters like Dakota and Jo had the chance to be a lot less one-dimensional, but they didn't really pick up on it.
In order to try and subdue the Yeti, Brick uses one of his fashion duffel bags. Unfortunately, the outfit it puts on the Yeti looks ridiculous, which sends him into a larger frenzy, and oh boy. You know where this is going. You can see from miles away where this is going. The mutant maggots hatch a plan to try and lure the Yeti by dressing up nice and looking all pretty, and Jo kind of chomps at the bit to get a makeover of herself done. Uncharacteristically so.
Once again, there's a lot of little bits and pieces in this season that I wish could have been fleshed out more. The characters could have been so much more interesting, to be honest.
What? Whoa. Video game world. My ultimate gamer dream come true. Still one life left. It's all on me now. Let's do this!
So yeah, Sam does the very original and very not done before parody of Donkey Kong, and I don't know, man, it's just kind of dumb to me. Even as a kid, I saw the whole Donkey Kong parody and was like, really? Donkey Kong? Isn't that path a little beaten down? I swear, it feels like until the year 2015, every single video game parody on a kid's show that was ever done was a parody of Pac-Man or Donkey Kong, and that always got on my nerves. That's kind of why I didn't really like Sam as a kid. First of all, his character design is pretty ugly, although I suppose it's not a totally inaccurate caricature. But pretty much all the gamer jokes done about him are so obviously made by someone who's never played any video games. I haven't totally brought it up, But like every episode, he'll have some goofy line like, "Oh wow, we're going motorboating. It's a good thing I'm a leveled up Hypermaster in Motorboat Action 9. And I'm here thinking that Motorboat Action 9 sounds more like a porno than an actual video game. Maybe I'm just taking it too seriously, but I don't know. I always found Sam's gamer shtick to be super generic and out of touch. It's like that infamous Law & Order SVU episode where two guys assault some poor girl. When she's asked about it, she's like, "They leveled up." Although, to be fair, SVU did it a lot worse. Sam is just kind of like what my Gen X mom thinks a stereotypical gamer would be.
What's up, action gamers? I'm a gamer. I love spaceships and robots and laser action. Spaceship laser robot upgrades. Tubular. I love playing action games on my Nintendo.
It makes me glad that cartoons tend to be much more inspired in their gaming jokes and episodes these days. I was watching part of the Amazing World of Gumball Final Fantasy episode recently, and it was clearly made by people who play video games. I'll take that over this any day, to be honest. Sam actually almost gets to the top in his whole Donkey Kong delusion, but sadly he fails. He clears the path for Joe, but her makeup is done pretty poorly and the Yeti laughs at her. She gets peeved and smacks him, saving Anthony Fantano and winning immunity for her team. Sam ends up getting voted out, which makes some sense. He did get the closest to winning the challenge for his team, but his failure at the most critical point is what led to such an easy victory for the Maggots. After Sam gets hauled away, Chris decides to do a team swap. Again, they seem to do that a lot in the later seasons. Joe and Scott switch sides.
Welcome to my team.
No, welcome to my team.
Sam gets the hurl, but right before, Dakota runs over to say goodbye. And honestly, it's pretty sweet. They formed an unlikely friendship within all this chaos, and hey, I think it's grown on me. Anyway, honestly, I think this is one of the better episodes. I don't really care for most of the humor in the second half, but I think the character interactions are really good and hint at interesting plot threads that I wish were more elaborated on. So that's 2 Switchy seals of approval.
Hey, did you know that Scott's favorite musician according to his online biography is Kanye East? Yeah, that doesn't really have anything to do with anything, but I thought it was interesting. Also interesting, Zoe's favorite band is The Birdles, and Stacy's favorite band is Simple Flan.
The next episode starts out a little differently. Chris does his normal recap at first, until the Department of Environmental Protection shows up and tries to arrest him, but it cuts to the theme song before we actually see how the situation plays out. We're dropped off among some usual team banter, and we see the newly formed Toxic Rats get acquainted, especially Brick and Joe. It's kind of funny that they went from being on the same team, to being on different teams, to being on the same team again. Part of me feels like the writers just really liked writing them as both adversaries and teammates and wanted the opportunity to do each. The campers enter the mess hall to get breakfast, only to find out that there's nothing there. They look into the kitchen to see if they can find anything to eat, and Chef uses that as an opportunity to lure them into the meat locker / moving truck. He dumps them in front of a mine that apparently exists on the island. There's a lot of locations like this season.
This is the Decision Game, a game of fate. The lives of you, me, and the human race hang in the balance.
The challenge in this episode is to navigate a deep, dark cave to find your team's golden statue. There's a couple of catches there. First of all, the level of toxic waste there is high enough for it to be a serious danger to the campers' health. Because of that, they all have armbands that show their level exposure so they can monitor how much time they have left before they risk permanent damage. It's also revealed that Dakota was sent down the mine for longer than what was considered safe, and she didn't die, but,
Where am I? Ah!
Seriously though, what is with this show and making female characters go bald? Like, what's the deal? Are the writers of this show just super big fans of like Sinead O'Connor or something? Oh, what, you didn't find that funny? Well, listen, I've been trying to make my videos a little bit more approachable for general audiences, and, you know, I've been trying to dial back some of the shock value and offensive humor in these videos. So, there's a lot of jokes that can be made about radioactivity and baldness, and I don't want to make any of them. So, yeah. Sinead O'Connor.
The meat of the episode here, despite being on some level a little too hardcore for my tastes, is actually pretty great. Joe and Scott being amongst new blood shakes things up a bit. Joe and Lightning haven't really interacted much so far, despite the running gag of him not knowing she's a girl, but they have a lot of natural chemistry. That is to say, Joe is really good at using his narcissism and competitiveness to her advantage, and the whole running gag is kicked up to 11 here, where Joe will literally just tell Lightning that she's not a guy, and he straight up doesn't believe her.
Oh, wow. I always wanted a hat like this. And I always wanted to die underground with a hat-loving loser. Guess we both win.
Hat-loving loser? Is that really the best you've got? Our main antagonist, everyone.
Mike, you okay?
Vito? Baby, is that you?
Good eye, Sheila. Name's Manitoba Smith.
Ow!
Here, leave the torches to the menfolk, beauty.
They talk like that in Manitoba?
Why do I find that funnier than, like, everything else here?
To the right, a tunnel carved out by giant rodent teeth.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Rodent?
To the left, mining car tracks. We go left.
I say we take the one on the right, because it's the right tunnel. Get it?
Is he even trying?
Manitoba Smith is sort of like the love child between Indiana Jones and Steve Irwin. And honestly, demeaning comments to women aside, it's a fun mixture. He's probably my favorite out of all the alternate personalities. I just love adventurers, I guess. I have a thirst for quests and exploration. Around this time, a lot of the armbands begin to change color, indicating that the campers have only 15 minutes before they're at serious health risk. Obviously, that's a little too close for comfort, and a few campers can't help but reflect on their mortality.
This ain't right! Man, I never kissed a Super Bowl ring!
And I've never kissed a guy.
Yeah. It's cool, dude. Lightning don't judge.
Okay, you know what? That's really funny. That's really funny. Especially in 2012.
Unfortunately for both teams, they all get split up in the chaos. Joe and Lightning leave poor Brick alone in the dark while the minecarts being written by the maggots split apart. Also, a somewhat familiar shadowy figure nabs Anne-Maria out of nowhere.
Ow! Mike! Mike! Wake up! Aw, I've read about situations like this, but it's so different in real life. Think, what would Joe do? Move it or lose it, Bubble Brain! Ugh.
I haven't really touched upon it yet, but I've grown to really like the weird mix of hatred and admiration between Cameron and Joe. It's a great character dynamic. Anne-Maria wakes up in the cave depths surrounded by a bunch of blind mutant gophers, and... come on. That's gotta be intentional. That can't be a total coincidence. Can it? These oversized gophers could probably lead the campers to a Mashu if they wanted to. It's revealed that Anne-Maria's kidnapper is none other than Ezekiel, and he has enlisted all the gophers as his personal minions. Gophers as in the cave animals, not the team from season 1. Honestly, seeing Ezekiel like this makes me sad. I know some people don't care, and that's fine, but whenever I see the whole mutant Ezekiel, I can't help but imagine what it would be like for his friends and family. I think about his parents, and then I think about my parents, and I can't stop myself from imagining the despair that would come with seeing your son driven to insanity on live television. His parents have got to feel something. I know he accidentally impaled his mom one time with a bow and arrow, but hey, nobody's perfect. I still kind of wish there would have been some plot thread about Ezekiel getting better and reintegrating with, like, society and stuff. I suppose the Total Drama writers had other plans, though. Ezekiel seems to develop a fixation for Anne-Maria and begins offering her gifts. She's not interested in any of them, really, and she acts kind of rude about it. Frankly, I would kill to have that signed picture of Ezekiel. In fact, if I could somehow get to meet Peter Oldring in real life, I would totally ask him to sign a copy of that photo for me.
That would be hilarious. Maybe even funnier than cardboard cutout Content ID Courtney. Maybe. Maybe.
She does get excited about Ezekiel having last season's $1 million, but unfortunately, it's completely destroyed. What's not destroyed, however, is a giant diamond he gives her. Everyone ends up in the general vicinity of Ezekiel's throne, and a whole bunch of chaos ensues. The team scramble to get their statues while also fending off all the gophers and Ezekiel, and that obviously gets hectic. It's also revealed that the super heavy backpacks they've been wearing and not allowed to open were full of bombs, made to destroy the inside of the mine. Hardcore.
Got it! Mike? Oh, we're not feeling so great.
You know, if it were 2018, I'd probably make an Infinity War joke right now, but it's not 2018, so I'm not gonna make any joke. I've been not making a lot of jokes in this episode review.
Zoe! Oh. Here! Hang on! I'm coming!
Whoops!
Butterfingers.
I'm sorry, this is ridiculous. Scott gets away with too much.
The toxic rats get a hold of their statue and get set to ride back to the entrance, while the maggots have a few stragglers fighting off one of the gophers. Brick decides against Joe's wishes to run back and save them, but in the process he accidentally breaks the statue and loses his team the challenge. Everyone rides out of the mine, and it's revealed that the only reason Chris made them do this entire challenge was to have the mine sealed off so the Canadian government would stop nagging him about the whole toxic waste being a danger to living creatures thing. Hippies. We cut to Cameron and Mike having a conversation outside of one of the cabins, and, wow. Is it just me, or should they really have used the late afternoon time of day color scheme more often? This is gorgeous. This is the kind of scenery I live for.
Mike, do you have multiple personality disorder?
What? Who told you that?
16 years in a bubble makes a guy pretty observant. I don't get why you're keeping it secret, but I think I can help you control it.
For real?
Sure, but you have to help me with Scott. I don't trust that guy.
Dude, that is one hell of a deal. Mike is getting a free ride, because frankly, if someone called me a hat-loving loser, I would want to see blood. I would want to see that person suffer. Not even because I'm offended or anything, it's just such a stupid insult. Cameron and Mike form an alliance, and we transition over to the elimination. Unfortunately, Brick gets voted out. I suppose being willing to save people from certain death is frowned upon in the toxic rats. At the very least, he leaves on good terms with everybody, and honestly seeing Mike, Zoe, and Cam salute him was adorable. Right after, Anne-Maria jumps into the catapult and quits the show because of the diamond she was given, but Chris lets her know it's not a real diamond and was likely a movie prop or something. She doesn't get the chance to change her mind and gets launched off with Brick. So now we're down 2 campers, and in order to replace Anne-Maria, Chris reintroduces Dakota as a competitor. She seems mad about it, and that surprises me because I would imagine being an intern is way worse than being a contestant. But then again, she's also a victim of radiation poisoning and has lost all her hair, so she might have bigger things on her mind than the short-term pleasure of cheesy tabloid fame. The next episode starts off with our remaining 6 contestants waking up on rafts in the middle of the lake, far from the island. Apparently, last night they were given mutant turkey that almost instantly knocked them out, because I doubt they would be super excited to be set adrift if they were given a choice. Mike picks up a fedora among all the junk they were set adrift with, and turns into Manitoba Smith for a bit, and Cameron acts out his side of the deal by turning him back into Mike. He says in a confessional that he's pretty much narrowed down all of Mike's triggers, like the shirt off for Vito and anger for Chester, but he still hasn't figured out how to bring Mike back consistently.
Morning, suckers! How'd you enjoy your turkey buttolini?
Hey, Chris, how many times did you call your mommy today? I had no idea that Tabasco was used as a thumb-sucking deterrent until I started interning for Soupy Cook McLean. What? What are you all staring at?
Your hair is already growing back.
Really? Yay! When did you all get shorter?
This is the actual show, right? This isn't like someone's weird transformation fanfiction, right? Okay.
The first half of the challenge is refreshingly simple. The campers just have to race back to shore, and anything goes.
Okay, protein powder puff. Get rowing.
Who made you the boss?
Hey, if you don't want to be captain of our rowing team.
Lightning is captain on every team. Let's do this.
That is how you do it, Joe. You have to make them want to do the manual labor. You have to give commands positively, not negatively. That's a CEO mindset right there.
Despite the fact that the rats are a team of 2, they are much more efficient than the maggots in the race and quickly gain the lead. Dakota's under a lot of stress with the whole mutation thing, and she runs to Zoe for comfort. And Zoe, being a total sweetheart, provides that kind of support, even to her own detriment.
You're a good friend, even if your hair is all wrong.
The rats get confronted by a gigantic squid, which gives the maggots a chance to catch up. Unfortunately for the maggots, though, Fang the mutant shark hops in and starts to bring a little mayhem for everybody, until it's revealed that Dakota's whole mutant monster thing has its perks. Dakota saves them from the shark, but only angers the squid. But at the last second, Cameron baits the squid to try and hit him in order to launch himself and his team all the way to the shore. Chris initially descends with his helicopter, until it's shown that Dakota is becoming more and more of a physical threat to him every second. Like, holy hell, she has hops. The second part of the challenge is digging up buried treasure on the island, and for winning, the maggots get a map and compass while the rats are handcuffed. It turns out, however, that the treasure in question is not something like gold. It's Gwen from the last season buried alive with Sam. Chris's nonchalance about burying people alive angers everyone, especially Dakota, and at that very moment she seems to complete her transformation into a 12-foot tall monster.
This is more of an opinion on the season as a whole, but I've always been kind of bothered by all this toxic waste stuff. It's a little bit too out there for me. I'm not gonna say that Total Drama Island was super realistic, because it wasn't, but at the very least I feel like most things that happen in the show, besides the slapstick, felt like they could theoretically happen in the real world. That's just me though.
In order to gain her trust, Scott tries to butter up Zoe a bit. He shows her that he found the immunity statue, which I'll admit is a smart play, but then he tries to turn her against Cameron and Mike, and I don't know. I know she's been having a little bit of friction with Mike and Cam recently, but Scott is just so unsubtly devious that I have trouble believing she'd take his side so easily. He's only a little bit better at lying than Cameron is. Not enough for me to think that she can't fall for Cameron's sloppy Mike antics if she can fall for Scott's fake crying. I think the characters are sort of dumbed down whenever Scott is around in order to make him get further, especially with all the sabotaging he does. I don't know why he still insists on doing that this late into the game. Everybody tries to make it through some nasty swamp in order to get to the treasure, but in the process we get some mutant animal interference. There comes a point where Zoe is about to get eaten alive by a mutant alligator, and Cameron finally figures out Mike's main personality trigger, Zoe being in danger. I love how when you go to earlier episodes, you can see that being the case in action. It's undoubtedly well foreshadowed, indubitably. The mutant alligator almost gets the maggots, but right in time, Dakota shows up and beats the crap out of him, to the point where I almost feel bad. I'll totally admit as well that even with my qualms with this show permanently damaging its characters, there's still a part of me that thinks Dakotazoid is badass. She even clears a path to the treasure for them by launching the gator through a forest of thorn bushes. The maggots make it to the general vicinity of the treasure, and Mike almost turns into Vito. Zoe is not having it. She's shooting daggers. If looks could kill, Mike would be decapitated right now. Cameron comes to the rescue, but also addresses that controlling Mike's personalities is getting excessively taxing, and begs Mike to come clean with Zoe. Not to much success. Honestly, Mike really should just go ahead with it, because given that this is all being broadcast on international TV, basically everyone on the planet already knows about his DID other than Zoe. Despite the fact that the maggots were way ahead, they still lose the challenge because Scott lies about hearing Gwen and Sam in a random location and gets everyone to start digging, while Joe quickly finds keys to get rid of her handcuffs and right after hears Gwen underground. She starts to dig, finds the chest, and wins the challenge. Right after, Dakota jumps in and rips Sam out of the chest, and he wakes up to find out about the whole mutant monster thing. And he's fine with it. I admire that.
Mike says he's real grateful you're helping him with his problem.
Problem? He told you about his multiple personality disorder?
Nope, but you just did.
Oh no.
Anyway, at the elimination ceremony, Scott is the one who gets voted off, which, like, he really did not need to throw this challenge. Even with the statue, like, it's dumb to play so recklessly. He does have the statue though, so he gets to stay, and the person who got the second most votes gets eliminated instead. Dakota. I can understand that, to be honest. Dakota's a pretty good sport about it too, and is a little too busy sucking face with Sam Jiu-Jitsu style to really care. Episode 9 starts off with Chris officially announcing the merged portion of the competition. From this point forward, every camper has to play for themselves. In order to signify the change, he destroys one of the 2 cabins to make everyone consolidate. I don't really see why that's necessary. I suppose it's just a relic of this game originally having 22 contestants. The teams may be gone, but some contestants are still buddying up for efficiency. Cameron asks to pair up with Joe, but she declines and points to her alliance with Lightning. Because Mike has had all his personalities kept under control lately, he and Zoe have gotten to getting along with each other a lot more easily. I imagine turning into an Italian-American stereotype and making out with Snooki every now and then would create some friction between 2 potential lovers.
Ah, looky. Multiple Mike thinks he's a ladies' man. What a loser.
Scott, you can't talk about Mike's multiple personality disorder. He told me about that in strict aspiring doctor-patient confidentiality. Besides, he's got it under control.
Oh, does he?
Yes. Although some are harder to contain.
Stop talking!
Every time Mike
Stop
loses his shirt,
talking!
Vito pops
You
up.
idiot, just stop
But you can't
talking!
say anything.
Shut up!
Please.
Shut up! Shut up!
Relax,
Just
Bubbles.
stop talking!
I ain't a squealer. That's your job.
I am so bad at keeping secrets.
Today's challenge seems to be themed after various types of crimes and felonies, including robbery, grand theft auto, and vandalism. Fitting the ethos of the tasks, Duncan is introduced as a former contestant in this episode, and he's wheeled in with a straitjacket like he's Hannibal Lecter. That's a little on the nose, and if you're super excited for Duncan's excellent zingers here, don't be. because he literally just runs off before anything interesting happens.
Yeah, I haven't really enjoyed any of the classic competitor cameos. They never do anything, and most of the time they feel kind of flanderized. I guess I did sort of enjoy the Anthony Fantano one, but it seems like that has just been an exception to the rule. And yes, I am writing that bit out for the rest of the video.
Here's the deal. You help me win today's challenge, and I won't tell Zoe the truth about all your funny characters.
How do you know about that?
Sorry.
This is why we here at Twitchy Productions disavow snitching. Snitching is a weakling move that betrays trust and the simple principle that what is said in confidence should stay in confidence. Cameron is lucky that I don't handle snitches Jersey style, because if I did, he would be covered in bullet holes and at the bottom of the Hudson River.
The first leg of the challenge is raiding Chef Hatch's kitchen to look for keys. Like a lot of challenges in Total Drama, it's deceptively safe sounding. Scott takes Mike out on a total humiliation ritual just as a means of breaking him down. And I gotta say, Scott is the master of making a lose-lose situation. There's a point where Zoe gets attacked by some mutant bucket cockroach monster or something and Mike runs in to save her, but Scott uses that as the perfect opportunity to ask Mike to check a garbage bag for treasure.
You know, I've been pretty tough on Scott so far, so I owe it to him and to you guys to admit that of all of his devilish wrongdoings and devious escapades, this is by far the best. It's cutthroat. It's mean. I wish we had a little more of this.
Everybody comes across a silver key, except for Mike, who finds a gold key in the garbage. Scott forces Mike to swap with him, and he's forced to concede. The next leg of the challenge involves stealing one of Chef's go-karts in order to race around select parts of the island to tag with graffiti. And it's not going to be a cakewalk given that Chef is pretty peeved about Chris using his stuff in all of the challenges, and he takes it out on the campers. Well, at least right now he does, but more on that later. In order to keep everybody from using his go-karts, Chef unleashes a bunch of laser squirrels, and he is able to apprehend Joe and Lightning after all the chaos. The two of them get locked up in a cage defended by Fang the Shark. At this time, Cameron and Zoe both drive off to the first graffiti spot, and Mike is forced to tow Scott the entire way because the golden key car doesn't even have a full set of wheels. I would say there's some karma there, but Mike still bears most of the cross. Inside the cage, Joe tells Lightning that she has a plan to escape, and the first thing they need to do is bend open the bars. Lightning does it, and Joe pushes him into Fang as a distraction. In the heat of the moment, Lightning has, the one good idea he's had in this entire season. He tells Fang that he'll lead him to Scott if he's free.
And now, given the circumstances, I realize there is something I have to do. I know this is going to be 3 videos in a row now, but there has never been a better opportunity than this one right now. So, I'm gonna be right back. Open up After Effects!
Team Lightning!
The campers set off to tag the select locations, with Zoe in the lead. Cameron initially has second place, but he gets so engrossed in his artwork that he sort of forgets about the challenge.
Wow, Cam, but you don't have to. You don't have to. All right, I'm coming.
What? What was that? Mwah! Magnifico.
Listen up. 3, landmark wasn't tough enough, so I added a 4. McLean out. McLean out.
Nobody touches my stuff. Nobody.
Damn, Chef, if you really wanted to, you could have just hired the voice actor Jacoto, my good friend and Chris McLean impersonator. You wouldn't have to do any sentence mixing, and his prices are cheap and accessible.
Zoe begins to climb the totem as Scott and Mike trail behind, and Scott isn't even being subtle about this whole blackmail thing. To the point where, although I'm definitely enjoying this, Zoe comes off as kind of stupid when she sees Mike doing everything for him, and not assuming there's something serious going on under the hood.
Ha ha! In your face!
In yours!
Help!
Whoopsie! Zoe, hold on!
I'm gonna need a tow to the last landmark.
Tow yourself! I'm helping Zoe.
Fine. I'll just get a lift from someone else.
And I quite like that. Scott's still very much in the green this episode. All the campers eventually make their way to Chef's additional landmark, which is revealed to be Mount Chrismore, which is like Mount Rushmore with Chris. Yeah, Mount Chrismore. Upon finding out about this, Chris freaks out and assumes that Duncan is behind it. unaware that his mistreated chef is the mastermind. Vito and Scott are the first to arrive at Chrismore, and Scott knocks him out with a gigantic club he apparently had. I don't really know where he got that. Zoe catches up right after Scott runs off, and she is so angry that even if looks couldn't kill, I feel like Mike is gonna be decapitated. Her anger quickly turns into concern, however, when she notices he's completely unconscious. As Zoe tries to wake him up, we somehow transport into Mike's subconscious to see him surrounded by his other personalities, and the final battle for control of the body commences. Well, final-ish.
Mike! What is wrong with you?
He's fighting his multiple personalities for control!
Multiple personalities?
Inside of Mike's head, he gets a burst of strength from the sound of Zoe's voice, and takes back control of his own head.
There! That's more like it. From now on, this brain is under new management. Mine!
Yeah, that right there is an Easter egg. A little flash of something lurking in Mike's head for the next season. And believe me, the total drama community was all over this like a bunch of detectives. We couldn't stop talking about it. Or, well, at least Shadow Wash 32 couldn't. Wait, excuse me, Shadow Ash 32.
Mike! Mike! Are you okay?
Better than okay. I won! Zoe, listen. My characters, they're not just for show. I have multiple personalities.
Yeah, I know. Cameron just told me.
Sorry! I should have told you first. I just didn't want you to think I was a total freak. Because the real me really likes you. A lot.
Are you kidding? I love oddballs, and you're officially the coolest one ever. Multiples just means there's more Mike to love.
You know what? I need to do something. Hey, dude. You know, I've been thinking about, the writings of Carl Jung, and,
You've read Carl Jung?
Well, I haven't read it, but I've played Xenogears, and that's basically the same thing. The point is, one of his ideas was how to become a fuller, better person, you kind of have to make peace with your internal opposite. And I've been thinking about that, and, I think I was too hard on you.
Okay.
So, if you want, I think we should join forces and finish this together. It's time for us to become one. Let's finish this.
Anyway, I really do like this scene, and it's one of the few instances in this season where I think the writers were willing to chill out for a bit and take themselves a little bit more seriously. It makes for a touching dialogue without any tricks or gimmicks. Well, aside for the whole fictionalized dissociative identity disorder, which I don't really feel comfortable taking a side on that, given I've heard all sorts of people say all sorts of opinions on whether they think Mike is a harmful representation of it or not. I don't feel like I have any meaningful experience to give you an answer one way or the other, but I still feel like I owe it to you guys to bring it up that there is discourse surrounding it. So, boom, consider that checkbox filled. The challenge ends off with Lightning coming in clutch all over Mount Chrismore, meaning he wins immunity. Psych! Because Mount Chrismore was not actually a real part of the challenge, Scott wins for being the first to spray paint the top of the totem pole. Duncan also comes back once more to completely detonate the monument, which, I guess it's something, but I still am disappointed with how little he is utilized in this episode. This episode's elimination is different from most others, because whoever wins immunity gets the only vote. Consequently, they can just pick off whomever they like, and since Mike has lost his usefulness as a blackmail victim, and now has the social capital to bite back at Scott threefold, he has chosen to take the catapult. Zoe says her last goodbye to her new boyfriend, and he gives her, a sobriety chip or something with his face on it, and they lean in for a kiss, right before Chris does the thing.
Typical Chris. Let the nerd with the mutant girlfriend make out for several minutes on camera, but don't let the one serious couple in this entire season kiss once. I'm not even a big fan of the pairing, but I really feel bad for the Zoke fans here. Or is it Mai? Mikey. McCoy?
Anyway, DID representation discourse notwithstanding, this is definitely one of my favorite episodes of the season. I love the challenge, I like the humor, and I think that it takes itself more seriously than usual, much to my enjoyment. It's also probably the most plot-heavy episode of the season, and I'm gonna predict that this is gonna end up the longest episode review in this entire video. Not even close. The final episode review is way longer than this one. The first episode review is longer too. Yeah, I don't really know why I thought this. Episode 10 begins with Chris visiting the campers from his gigantic Zeppelin. He has one, for whatever reason. The challenge is going to be aerial themed, and Chris invites the Total Drama Classic competitor Heather to demonstrate.
Wow, you're the Heather? Sorry, I have this policy of not talking to losers.
Oh, I'm not a loser. You know, unless everyone else thinks I am.
Heather will now demonstrate the aerial challenge while wearing a jetpack.
This challenge seems kind of unsafe.
No, it's totally unsafe. Did I mention you'll also be attacked by flying mutant fire-breathing goats?
That's it! I'm out!
Okay, but before you go, you should say goodbye to this! The ultimate total drama prize!
Money. Removing all common sense and fear of danger.
Too bad you'll never win it.
Just watch me, if that's okay with you.
Wow. Ugh. The dialogue in this season is certainly not its strong suit, but it's like worse than usual in this episode. Maybe it's just me, but I've been rolling my eyes at this scene for over a decade now.
At this point in the competition, the tensions are higher than ever. Zoe is furious at Scott for manipulating Mike, Lightning is incandescent at Joe for using him as bait, and Cameron is just trying to survive it all. Joe, quote-unquote, offers an alliance to Cameron, but basically all that means is that he has to do all of her work. The contestants are taken to a gigantic landfill, which apparently just exists somewhere on the island. I don't know where or when that showed up, but it's here, I guess. They are each given a flying machine they have to build, like planes, helicopters, and hot air balloons. Scott is tasked with building a bird, whatever that means. He's kinda mad about it, and it reminds me a lot of how Heather had to catch a bear back in season 1. Despite the fact that none of the campers have aerospace engineering degrees, or that's what I assume, they build their contraptions with relative ease, especially Lightning. Apparently, he can't spell the word meat, but he is able to create a helicopter out of an old fan and a motorcycle frame. Yeah, at the same time, Chris is being pretty lax with the specifications. Cameron ends up being the first to build his aircraft, a rocket. As a reward, he gets a smoke machine. Yeah, a smoke machine. Imagine all the possibilities.
Nice work, Cameron. I've taught you well. Now, better let me hold on to that. Gotta keep it safe, or someone might try to scam it from you.
No, I don't think Joe is pushing me around at all. I'd be nowhere without her. I owe all my success to her, and I'll ride my way to victory with her assured advice.
Chris takes to the skies to commence the next half of the challenge, when Heather takes notice of a certain silver case in the cockpit. She decides to ambush him and Chef, and takes off in the blimp with the money. Chris initially doesn't care that much until he realizes that all of his Jemmy Awards were on the Zeppelin, and then and there he makes the new challenge, stopping Heather and getting the Zeppelin back.
Finally, an interesting cameo.
The campers take flight and each get turns trying to stop Heather, but Heather is resilient, and the flying mutant mountain goats are causing problems as well. Chef took their eggs to use as ammo in the competition, which peeved them off. I don't know why Chris would intentionally anger the native animals of the island to make things more difficult if he really wanted his Zeppelin back. Also, I get that there's toxic waste everywhere, but I don't think mountain goats would even be in Ontario anyway, so I don't know how these mutant ones even showed up. Cameron provides cover for Joe at first until Lightning flies up to him and tells him that she, or he in Lightning's mind, is going to drop him first chance. This prompts Cameron to take out a remote control and explode the smoke machine. It's revealed that because he predicted that she'd take his reward without his permission, he fitted it with a small explosive just as a fallback. Get decimated, Joe. Zoe loses control of her plane and falls off, but luckily she lands on one of the mutant flying goats, and after some resistance, she manages to tame it and even its friends. I suppose losing the plane wasn't such a bad thing after all.
Yeah, eggs as weapons. Great choice, Chris.
Hey, Bird Brain!
Huh?
This is for Mike! Goats, fire!
I would make more diverse video game jokes, but the problem is I don't play that many video games. So, Undertale is the best you're getting.
Lightning is the first to breach the Zeppelin and the first to confront Heather.
All right, girl, hand it over.
Oh, I'm sorry. All I wanted was the money. But this has just gone too far. Here, just take it.
Ah, what is wrong with you? You're crazy.
I was robbed. I deserve that money.
You know, if you watch the American ending of World Tour, she literally was. Honestly, Heather is probably the most morally justified person in this entire episode. The scuffle leads to the Zeppelin beginning to decline, and its fate is sealed when Cameron flies right into it. The $1 million is saved, the Zeppelin sinks, and Cameron wins. They don't really touch upon what happened to the Jemmies, however. Knowing Chris though, he probably set out a whole search expedition for them. At the elimination, Joe gets voted out with 2 votes against her. Lightning was presumably one of them, and I think Cameron probably was the second. Joe loses her crap at him, calling him a backstabber, until he tells her that he learned that from her, and she finds some bittersweet solace in that. She also finally tells Lightning that she's a girl. All in all, this episode was pretty good. There were some especially weak bits of dialogue in the first third, but it mostly stopped there. The challenge was interesting and visually creative. The physical comedy involving all the makeshift flying machines was good too. I'm a little mixed on Heather though. I love how she gets to be involved in the challenge, but I wish she had more wit in this episode. Given that she plays such a small role, you think she would be given space to say something meaner than calling someone a loser. Like, seriously, Heather? What happened to you? I think my opinion of this episode would be genuinely so much higher if instead of saying that she has a policy against talking to losers, she could say something much more suited to her BITC personality. Just imagine a world where she responded to Zoe with something like, "Sorry, Pasty, I only talk to C-list and above," and then did a whole bitch blank. The world would be a much better place. Episode 11 opens up with Cameron and Zoe conspiring to vote off Scott. They seem pretty intent on the whole thing, and part of me wonders why they didn't try it last episode. They think about convincing Lightning to join them against him, as a 3-person alliance would negate any opportunity for Scott to stay in. Scott overhears their conversation and springs into action by catapulting Cameron.
It makes more sense in the episode.
And then asking Zoe if she wants to vote off Lightning with him. She is understandably not intrigued, but he points towards Lightning's physical prowess as a good reason to kick him out. She sees the logic, but doesn't go forward with it. Scott decides to go and try and recruit Lightning instead, so Lightning gets attacked by alliances on both fronts. Unfortunately for his alliance-loving assailants, they cannot keep up with his lightning speed. Or something. I can't think of a better play on words right now. Lightning has his head so far into his basketball that he totally tunes out everyone trying to make plans with him. But whenever he gets a shot, he expresses joy with an "all right," or "oh yeah," so everyone who asks for his vote thinks he's actually on their side. It's quite funny. It's the kind of joke you'd see on Seinfeld or something. When the group convenes for the challenge, Chris tells the contestants that he decided to make the challenge today very easygoing as a reward for all their hard work. However, the plan immediately changes when he accidentally steps into one of Scott's traps set for Fang and is launched right into the communal bathrooms, and is presumably in the plumbing and sewage or something. It's not made clear for comic effect. Because of that, Chris loses his temper and tells Chef to do one of his challenges that he had previously turned down. Challenges so brutal and so dangerous that even notorious psychopath and alleged war criminal Chris McClane didn't want to do them. Like, cooking a meal and playing tag. Wow. The first half of the challenges are campers tasked with preparing a meal from whatever they could find on the island. After a ridiculously slim 20-minute window to find ingredients and cook a meal, they have to serve whatever they made to classic competitor DJ. And this is probably the worst he's ever been characterized in the entire history of the show. I know he's always been a coward, but this is on a level where it's not even funny. He's just crying and whimpering the whole time.
Chef doesn't know what he's talking about. There's no food in this forest. Think, Lightning, think. What makes steak? Trees! Come on, tree, give me some steak.
Wow, that is so funny. That is so hilarious. He is so stupid that he thinks steak comes from trees. Wow, that is so funny.
None of the campers have any luck making edible food, with the exception of Cameron. He finds a bunch of toxic mushrooms that he bakes into a quiche. I assume the toxicness of the mushrooms just disappears or something when he cooks it, because the episode doesn't acknowledge it after the quiche is done. In order to increase his odds, Scott makes an effort at sabotaging the others' meals. He puts poison ivy in his Zoe salad and switches out his nasty quiche for Cameron's delicious one. Apparently Cameron falls for it despite the obvious visual differences, although one can easily argue the discoloration is so intense just to make it clear to the audience. The campers show off their meals to DJ for taste testing, but before they have the chance to get his expert opinion, he just starts screaming and runs off. And that's it for DJ.
Yeah, I think this is the worst cameo in the entire season.
Instead, the campers are made to eat their own dishes, and, well, you can certainly tell that the animators don't have as much creative freedom to make the vomit scenes in this show as they did in the first couple of seasons. These people are eating mutant animals covered in random bodily fluids they found, and we see less vomit than we do when a girl gets woozy and does a handstand. Because of this, despite this theoretically being the grossest gross-out challenge in the series' history, it's probably the second tamest behind the China challenge. Nevertheless, because Scott finessed Cameron's quiche, he is the only one capable of finishing a dish, and he wins the first half of the challenge. As reward, he gets to participate in the second half of the challenge without the tracking collars the others are fitted with. The challenge is racing through the forest to a flagpole while being pursued by Chef with a, spaghetti cannon. Honestly, despite Chris and Chef's posturing, I think last episode's challenge was a lot more dangerous than this. As the challenge begins, Cameron offers Lightning help removing his collar in exchange for an alliance. Lightning agrees, but after having his collar removed, he does the Lightning thing and tries to backstab Cameron. Cameron grabs onto his shirt and piggybacks him because Lightning's other thing is his lacking intellect, and he runs all the way towards the finish line completely unaware of his co-pilot. Chef pursues Zoe and shoots her down a ravine without any hesitation. We cut to Zoe down in the pit holding back tears until she notices that her 2-day Mike sobriety chip was partially broken in the fall. Also, nice detail putting Gwen's chicken hat down there. I really like when this show does stuff like that. This prompts her to discard all of her inhibitions, and she hatches a multi-layered plan to get revenge on Chef, Izzy style. She also just turns into an Olympic gymnast and expert markswoman somehow. This is a nitpick, but I can't help but point out how inconsistent the consequences of slapstick and injuries are in this show. Cameron has been launched around like a tetherball this entire episode, and the show barely acknowledges it. Meanwhile, Zoe falls down a ravine, and it's supposed to be this touching, badass scene of redemption. Another nitpick, I find it a bit thematically unsatisfying that Chef ends up being the person who pushes Zoe over the edge, figuratively and literally, instead of Scott. The only reason Scott really loses this challenge in the end is because of Fang, and Zoe doesn't really play much of a role in it at all. If there's any person I'd have loved to see take down Scott, it would have been Freaky Zoe. The winner at the end of the day is Cameron, because Lightning made his way to the flagpole without noticing he had someone in the passenger seat. And by passenger seat, I mean back. Cameron is technically the first to hit the pole and wins immunity. At elimination, we see Scott covered in bandages in a wheelchair. Once again, this is a nitpick and not actually a serious problem, but the fact that Scott got crippled by being hit with a boulder while Cameron is totally fine, despite all of his physical toil in this episode, is a perfect example of the inconsistent consequences I was talking about earlier. I don't want to harp on it too much because it's really not a big deal at all, but it is kind of funny when you think about it. Anyway, Scott gets voted out because, well, in the words of Terrence,
"You are such a dick, Scott.
You're a dick.
You're a dick.
You're a dick.
You're a dick."
Also, I mean, he totally miscalculated when he threw the episode 8 challenge and wasted his idol. Just saying. He could have eliminated either Lightning or Joe right there, but he didn't. Chef initially carries out the elimination, but an improperly lit Chris McClane shows up right before Scott gets launched to do the honors. And as a way of getting back at Scott for the whole snare trap into the communal bathroom thing, Chris invites Fang to join Scott on the catapult. Ouch. So, we're in the final stretch, the penultimate episode. Well, that's only technically the case if you're in Canada. They decided to advertise episode 12 and 13 as a two-parter and air them together on Cartoon Network. After having his immunity taken from him in the last episode, Lightning's killer instinct has been cranked up to 11. The only thing he cares about is making Cameron suffer, and his constant threats and taunts begin to cause stress. Cameron looks to Zoe as a source of solace, however her recent change in demeanor means she's not as good at cheering people up as she used to be. Nevertheless, they still decide to work together against Lightning, even if their chemistry isn't as friendly and easygoing as it used to be. The final three make their way towards the Mutant Forest of Terror, an area of the island which I presume is more mutated and hostile than the rest. Their challenge is to navigate the dangerous landscape and find a rare flower that is in the possession of a mutant Venus flytrap named Larry. Apparently, he used to be Chris's pet plant until he was left alone on the island and turned into a 3-story monster. Yikes. In order to win the challenge, you have to successfully deliver Larry's flower at the finish line. That's easier said than done though, because the environment is incredibly dangerous with fire-breathing plants, gigantic mosquitoes, and sinkholes into toxic waste everywhere. We even see an intern named Josh fall right into it and fly out totally deformed.
Actually, never mind. You guys already know my opinion on this kind of stuff, and the general point is better said elsewhere.
Question, how are we supposed to find this Larry?
Ah, I see. We each get a map.
No. You each get a piece of the map. You think printer cartridges grow on trees?
Yeah, that map wasn't gonna be very helpful anyway. There's like nothing on it.
Game plan? Darn right, Lightning has a game plan. My map has the end zone, so I'm just gonna power through till I see a giant X.
Yeah, I mean, we make fun of him for it, but that's basically the only thing that's on the map anyway. I can't blame him.
Lightning goes it alone while Cameron and Zoe team up. As you would expect, the mutant wildlife causes them all a lot of problems, but their struggles don't end there. The fact that Lightning doesn't get along with the others is obvious, but the friendship finalists are beginning to have more and more friction between them. Cameron's, well, unreliability begins to get on Zoe's nerves, while her increasingly callous demeanor bothers him. I mean, I would dislike being used as bait for a mutant flytrap quite a bit personally.
Like, I'm gonna let Cameron lower me down. My pet hamster, Miss Puffy Cheeks, is stronger than he is.
Was that a cutaway gag?
Although Cam and Zoe were the first to get to Larry, their initial plan doesn't work and Lightning manages to be the first to get to the flower. However, it turns out that grabbing the flower isn't the only difficult part. You also have to outrun Larry when he grows legs and chases you to get his flower back. Lightning fails to consider this and has the flower stolen by Zoe while being restrained. Zoe and Cam pass the flower back and forth until Cameron starts to doubt Zoe's intentions and refuses to give the flower back. The whole friendship finale thing is lost on him, and his doubt is pretty vindicated when he gets swallowed by Larry and Zoe just runs off without him. He screams to her for help and she initially ignores his plea, until she stops to reflect on what she was doing for a second. She had come to this game a very introverted, insecure person, and in the process she met two great friends. I mean, look at these clips from the previous episodes along with this completely new clip of Cameron with spaghetti hair. That's true friendship, folks. And to her, leaving a friend for dead for a 7-digit prize isn't worth it. So she removes her head tie and goes back to rescue him. This gives Lightning the chance to get the flower back and make it to the finish line. And right after, Larry just spits Zoe and Cam out anyway, so in hindsight, it would have probably been better for her to leave him for dead.
Larry! Buddy! Look what I rescued for you! Who's a good man-eating plant? Larry's a good man-eating plant. Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Ooh, that's seriously messed up.
I'm gonna have to agree with Lightning. Frankly, it seems to me that Larry is in kind of an abusive relationship with Chris. Chris sends the contestants to steal Larry's flower and willingly put him in pain just so he could give it back and pretend to be the hero of the situation, while he was responsible for Larry's pain in the first place. Let's not forget that Chris completely forgot about the poor Venus flytrap. He left Larry alone without any food to be deformed by radiation poisoning for years. This is not a wholesome relationship, folks. This is a manipulative, neglectful, Stockholm Syndrome dynamic between two broken individuals. At the very least, Zoe and Cam seem to be making up. They both apologize and decide to be friends again, and it's a sweet moment. As a reward for winning, Lightning gets the choice to knock out whichever of the two losers he wants. Cameron initially offers himself up as a means of apologizing to Zoe for his lack of trust and selfishness. He gives a whole speech about how he came to the game as a boy and is leaving a man, or a slightly less fragile boy, but the tension is lost when Lightning says that he was actually planning to boot Zoe. Yeah, I suppose Zoe is undoubtedly the more overtly threatening contestant, and Lightning is just covering his bases.
So yeah, that was the penultimate episode of Total Drama Revenge of the Island. It feels like I should have more to say about it, but really, I don't. I guess despite all the crazy mutant stuff, it's a pretty straightforward episode. So, finale time!
The final two for this season has always been interesting to me. I can get Cameron. I remember when I first found out that Cameron was one of the finalists and how I thought to myself, yeah, that makes sense. Lightning, however, is kind of a curveball. I mean, I've barely talked about him in this video, mostly because for the vast majority of the season, he's just kind of a playful comedy character. Until the merge, he almost never did anything important enough to directly acknowledge, as almost all of his on-screen antics were just jokes, but not even in a front and center way like Owen, for example. Honestly, I was surprised that he even made it to the merge. I know that seems silly because he's supposed to be a skilled athlete and everything, but so many of the jokes involving him have the punchline of him failing to do things properly, so I sort of assumed he would be a stereotypical bully jock character who gets decimated by characters who do the reps at the library, and those characters don't last long. I sort of think there's a weird disconnect there. Because so many of the jokes involve him making mistakes and getting hurt, It's easy to classify him as a Tyler-esque character in that he tries to seem cool and flashy but actually sorta sucks. There's a part of me that feels like his role as an arrogant punching bag earlier in the season is at odds with his role as a serious contender and threat later on. 1 second, the show wants me to laugh at this stupid idiot who can't spell the word meat, and the next second I'm supposed to watch in awe at this badass who's out for blood. I don't really know if I dislike this or if it's even worth complaining about though. I was just thrown a little bit for a loop. So the fact that he made it to the finale, whether that's a good or a bad thing, is just like, well, I think about it. I can't help but look at it and think, oh wow, that's a thing of minor curiosity to me. That's something I can't help but think about with a solemn look on my face. Honestly, on some levels, it's a good thing. A lot of the humor and writing of the season is pretty predictable, but this is a notable exception. Hey, it's me from the future. I'm adding this on later on because I think there's actually a good point here that I neglected to make in the original script. The fact that Lightning and Cameron are the finalists is actually a better idea than I originally thought it was, because, you know, the whole brain versus brawn thing is how they kind of advertised it, and theoretically maybe Joe could have also been the brawn character, but the fact that Cameron and Lightning are such total diametric opposites, I think makes for an interesting finale, because Lightning is an idiot, but he's super athletic, and Cameron's very, very smart, but he's incredibly weak. And I think that makes the finale more interesting. Anyway, before the challenge is formally introduced, Chris rides towards the contestants in a Roman-themed chariot.
Slave, bring me my mystic seeing glass. Hey, you know what? In ancient Rome, blowing a raspberry was a show of respect.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was. It always was, Cameron. You're just overreacting and making stuff up.
As a reward for making it to the finale, both Cameron and Lightning get the opportunity to talk to one of their parents. Cameron goes first and talks to his mom.
Gummy Bear, you look so different. Is that Muscletone?
Wow, that is not the voice I envisioned her having. Cameron's mom congratulates him on his success up to this point, but is also the bearer of bad news. Apparently, they're short on funds, and because of that, unless he wins the million, they will have to completely deflate his bubble at home. I can't help but wonder why Cameron even has a bubble in the first place. He's not immunodeficient, otherwise he'd be dead by now, but his mom still insisted on locking him inside of his room for his entire life. Honestly, that's Trinity killer shit. Cameron's whole premise as a character is meant to be tongue-in-cheek and silly, but you could just as easily use it as a setting for some psychological horror novel about some innocent kid raised by a narcissistic parent who abuses him under the guise of protectiveness. Cam's mom and Chris McClain would make good friends.
It's Pops! My boy's gonna win the whole $1 million shebang.
I'll do you proud, Pops.
He's the best son an athlete could ever hope for.
You know it, Pops. Over here.
What if Lightning doesn't win?
Impossible. I'll bet my championship rings on it.
What? You're kidding, right, Pops?
He'd better win, because without these rings, I'm nothing. Nothing!
Pops? Pops? No!
I honestly really like this. Even though the better side of me thinks it'd be good for Cameron to not live his entire life in a sterile chamber, I appreciate how the show gives both finalists something to lose in this whole scenario.
I also think that it was a good touch that despite the fact that Lightning constantly pushes this incredibly arrogant and self-worshipping persona, it immediately shatters when he realizes that his dad is willing to bet everything on his victory. It hints at Lightning not being totally as self-assured as he lets on. This whole scene in general really adds a lot of dimension to him as a character, and I think it's evidence that there's a lot more to him than I used to give credit for. He seems to have a really obstructed relationship with his father, and the way he's chomping at the bit for his dad's attention makes me curious about how this all feeds into the way he socializes himself throughout the season's runtime. Perhaps there are feelings of inadequacy to his parents that feed into his competitive me exterior.
I know I sound like I'm looking really deep into this, and yeah, to be fair, this is definitely a sophomore year studying psychology kind of tangent, but at the same time, there's definitely a reason they made it so that Lightning's father didn't even look at him in his video chat. They were definitely cooking something there, as the kids might say.
The final challenge takes our competitors to the Chrisiseum, an arena built by Chris out of what I assume is a bunch of old junk he had lying around. I never consciously made note of this until recently, but I like how they use the World Tour planes, give me a sec. Vertical stabilizer. They use the World Tour plane's vertical stabilizer in the construction, and it's tricked out with an audience chamber, tons of scrap and weapons, and a whole VIP area for Chris and his interns. He's sitting right between the human version of Murdoch from Gorillaz and the intern who never irons her shirt. I like to call her Squiggly Shirt. All the previous contestants from the season make a return, and it's only now where it really sinks in how deformed and tortured the toxic rats were.
Go Lightning!
Wow, thanks, guys.
Team Lightning! Woo!
What happened to Scott?
Yeah, Fang had a little too much fun with him after he took the hurl of shame, so we got him this nifty trauma chair. It even has lights that blink for yes and no.
Is that a yes or a no?
No idea. But does anyone really care? It's Scott!
What the hell?
Are we really gonna do this again? I think we're gonna have to do this again. But if you saw me talk about my weird feelings with Ezekiel and Alejandro falling into the lava last season, pretty much everything said there applies here as well. Except, truthfully, to me as a kid, this was worse. I was genuinely haunted when I saw this for the first time. It was especially bad when Revenge of the Island was the newest season, because I thought they intended to keep Scott like this forever. And upon first glance, it looked to me like they completely decapitated him or something to fit him in the chair, which is some morbid body horror type shit. The fear that they were gonna leave him like this forever was a horrific thought pervading my young mind. I mean, they didn't seem to have any qualms making characters like Ezekiel and Dakota be permanently disfigured, so why wouldn't they do the same with Scott? All-Stars came to the rescue though and had Scott totally fine and able-bodied again, which for me was a sigh of huge relief. I did not like seeing Scott get put into a minimally conscious state and be laughed at for it as retribution for being a jerk to others on a TV show. That's such a weird sentence to say out loud. It reminds me of how easy it is to forget that this is the same show that had scenes as masterfully executed as Courtney, Katie, and especially Heather's eliminations. No matter how hard these writers try, they have not been able to create a character's downfall that hits as perfectly as Heather's head being shaved. They got close with Alejandro, but I think that a lot of the punch the scene would have had is sort of spoiled by how thrown together the last few minutes of World Tour were. Despite all the efforts this season takes to make everything zanier and crazier, they still haven't been able to replicate the famous moments of triumph from the first season that were done without any of the crazy Looney Tunes decoration. It's jarring.
But one thing I do want to state is that if you see Scott in the Star Trek Captain Pike chair and you don't really care and or you find it funny, that is totally fine.
One thing that occurred to me in the aftermath of the World Tour video is that there was kind of a contradiction between how much I loved Sierra as a character and how I was always super uncomfortable with Ezekiel's whole mutant lava arc. When you look at both of these scenarios with a sense of morality and ethics based in the real world, they are both tragic and horrific. I mean, if someone did to Cody what Sierra did in real life, they would probably be arrested on counts of sexual assault, stalking, and harassment, and reasonably so. But one of these things left my 10-year-old self borderline traumatized, and the other one was and still is, like, the pinnacle of comedy for me. There's a disconnect there, and we can speculate all day on why that might be. I mean, admittedly, I seem to get a lot of entertainment out of this character dynamic. But the point I'm making is that everyone's sense of humor is different, and what might be comedy gold to one person might fall flat or hit a little too close for home for another person, and after having one or two weirdos in the comment section of the Season 3 video accuse me of being pro-sexual assault because I thought Sierra was a funny character, I just want to clarify to everyone that this is a cartoon and everyone's tastes are different. If you saw Scott in the chair and thought it was funny and didn't really mind it, that's totally fine. I mean, that's probably what the show's writers were aiming for. They probably realized that it was a funny idea to follow up the Star Wars reference with Alejandro with a Star Trek reference for Scott. For me, that type of humor is a little too off color, but it's cool if you don't think that's the case. I'm not trying to do the whole old school SpongeBob critic thing where I put people's moral character into question over having a bit of a twisted and occasionally mean-spirited sense of humor. Anyway, the final challenge of the season is straightforward. Beat the crap out of the other guy. Cameron and Lightning are given 15 minutes to take whatever junk they can from the dump and use it to create weapons and armor. And it pains me to make this exact joke again, but the time figures in this season are so bizarrely short. I guess for Lightning, grabbing a bunch of pots and pans to use as weapons seems possible to get done in 15 minutes, but all we see from Cameron is him typing on some laptop he found lying around, and suddenly he has a fully equipped Iron Man style combat suit. It took Tony Stark several months locked in a cave to do what Cameron did in around the same time I spent reviewing the last Total Drama World Tour episode.
Yeah, I'm gonna break you into so many pieces you'll be all like, which way is up?
That doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, well,
You stink!
Oh yeah? Well, you're stupid.
You're stupid.
Nuh-uh.
The match ends when one gladiator pins the other for 3 seconds.
3 seconds? That's it?
Ha! I'll pin you so long, you'll be all like, who turned out the lights?
Once again, swing and a miss.
And go!
Go Lightning! Kiss the $1 million goodbye.
Correction, kiss your butt goodbye.
Yeah, Cameron, I'll be honest. I don't see you having that much merit as a trash talk judge. Kiss your butt goodbye? That's the best you've got? All I'm saying is, don't be so quick to criticize Lightning's takes and zingers when yours are basically just as cold. After a bit of scuffling, Chris decides to up the stakes between the characters by introducing, you guessed it, mutant animals! Woo! Yeah, baby! That's what we've been waiting for, ladies and gentlemen! It initially starts out with a boxing cockroach, who distracts Cameron enough to give Lightning the upper hand.
Ow! Armor strength 80%! Ow! 75%!
Wow. If you thought the velocity at which money was donated in the World Tour Telethon was erratic, you're gonna be taken aback by the rate at which Cameron's armor suit loses battery. Unless his armor is powered by, like, an iPhone battery, it doesn't make that much sense. Chris at first tries to trickle out the mutant animals one by one, but after Lightning reflects one of Cameron's energy blasts and destroys his remote control, all of the crazy animals from throughout the season are unleashed at the same time and things go haywire. And, man, I'm sorry for being so negative, but I can't help but watch all of this ridiculous chaos and be strikingly aware of how little any of it means to me in comparison with, say, the finale from season 1. Right now, I'm watching a bunch of cartoon characters fighting for their lives against dangerous mutant monster creatures, and I'm not even anywhere near as interested in what's going on as I am when I was watching a goth chick and jolly fat guy racing around a crummy summer camp with funny hats on. It's hard to imagine that these scenes are from the same shows, but, like, there's no better time to say than now that all the crazy mutant creature stuff in this season makes it really hard for me to connect with the events of the show on any serious level. It becomes excessively surreal to the point where I have a hard time following the events of the show with any emotional investment. It's hard to immerse myself into the environment of the new Camp Wawanakwa. I know immersion is kind of a meme word, but that's the best term I can think of that isn't another meme word like atmosphere. I think the best way of putting it is that the more this show leans into, like, sci-fi, if you can call the mute animals sci-fi, the harder it is for me to suspend my disbelief and empathize with these characters in the way I could early on. I think Total Drama's first 3 seasons had a very delicate but very particular blend of the wit and dialogue-focused humor that you can find in live-action comedy, with the perfect amount of cartoonish slapstick to add some charm without spoiling it. The depiction of reality in the show was just grounded enough for us to grow attached to the characters and imagine ourselves in the show's world, while still enjoying the cartoonishness of it all. And I think Revenge of the Island is where this balance goes out of whack, and the excessive surrealism puts a ceiling on how much I can connect with the characters as a whole. Part of me is worried that I'm being too harsh, but upon reevaluation of things I've talked about with other fans of the show, I don't think I'm alone in this sentiment. I suppose someone playing devil's advocate might say that the level of extremity that the later seasons went to was to increase popularity amongst audiences and critics, but I genuinely have trouble believing that was effective. From a crude YouTube poll I did last year, most people seem to prefer the game format and social humor of the show over the slapstick. Just from my own experiences, I've heard a lot more people tell me they wish the series dialed back on the zany escapades and spent more time on the interpersonal character development than the other way around. I've never had someone tell me that they wish the show would slow down with the love triangles and manipulation and focus more on the scenes where characters run for their lives from squirrels who shoot lasers from their eyes. That's never happened to me. I have a lot of trouble believing that stuff like the laser squirrels and walking sharks were what made most people love this show. Another way of putting it is, if you ask most fans of this show what their all-time favorite moment is, you're usually going to get answers like Lindsay cursing out Heather, Trent and Gwen making up in the season 1 finale, or Duncan and Courtney's first kiss. I've never heard someone tell me something like the brick cannonball scene was the zenith of this show. Although, if you based your perception of the Total Drama fanbase off of Cartoon Network's advertising, you might think otherwise. They really seem to believe that Brick getting hit in the face with a cannonball is what we all came for, when it's not. It's not particularly offensive or bad to me, but it's the type of humor that works best as the cherry on top of everything else. And I came for a delicious sundae, not a whole bowl of cherries. I'm really hungry now. Anyway, we still have an episode to review, so let's get back to that. Cameron and Lightning navigate the whole friends in danger thing very differently. Lightning doesn't care, obviously, while Cameron begins ducking the challenge to protect the spectators from being eaten alive by Larry and the other animals. He succeeds, but in the process is almost completely beaten by Lightning, right until he uses his suit to create a gigantic electromagnetic charge.
The charge overloaded my armor! I'm stuck!
Yosha! What the? What's happening?
Oh, nothing. I just turned you into a giant magnet.
Ah! Ah! 1, 2, 3! Switchy wins the million!
Yes! 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 Once again, the Switchy sweep never ends! It's always Switchy season, ladies and gentlemen! Switchy spring, Switchy summer, Switchy fall, Switchy winter! Sorry, Cam, sorry, Lightning, but you two are nothing compared to me! My victories are boundless, ceaseless even! Switchy!
Well, actually, I didn't really win the $1 million. Though, you probably understand that by now. I've done this like 3 times. Cameron nudges himself just enough to fall on Lightning with his new Bobby Fabulous white hairstyle and wins the $1 million.
This is an outrage! The challenge was rigged! I did not lose to that bubble lover! It's impossible! Sorry, Pops!
It's weird to say this, but like, I think that if this episode was exactly the same except there was no mention of Lightning's father, the championship rings, Lightning would be one of my least favorite characters in the Season 4 cast instead of one of my favorites. It's interesting how such small details can affect a person's enjoyment of a story so thoroughly.
Cameron wins the $1 million, but as a way to say thank you to all the people he'd met in the season, he makes a decision to split the money with the other contestants. Initially, he intended to spend the money on purified air, but I suppose he realized there was literally no reason to do that, and his mom might just be a neurotic psychopath. His newfound friends rejoice, and the campers all celebrate. Well, that's one way it ended. That's how it ended on Teletoon in most modern-day sources of watching the show. But in an alternate universe, after Lightning gets struck by lightning, Cameron's suit short circuits, and he is the first to fall down. Lightning wins the $1 million, and he chooses to keep the money for himself, much to Joe's dismay as she felt like she was the only reason he made it so far. To be fair, she's kinda right. She carried both of them. It's also implied that the lightning strike left Lightning injured and partially paralyzed, so his dream of moving on as a professional football player might not become a reality. I wish this show didn't do stuff like this so often. Just let these characters have happy endings. Seriously, they've worked so hard. Anyway, Cameron and Lightning's ending is a pretty good sport about it all, and opts to live outside of his bubble from that point forward.
All things considered though, I do think Cameron's ending is a lot more thematically appropriate.
I remember watching the finale live back in 2012 and being a bit peeved that Lightning was celebrated as the quote-unquote canon winner of Revenge of the Island on Cartoon Network. Because to me and a lot of other people, it was a bit sloppy and not that good an ending to the story. I sort of have this theory that the reason the Alejandro and Lightning endings are so hard to come across in good quality nowadays is because Fresh TV isn't particularly proud of them and don't want to release them officially because of that. There's a lot that makes me believe that the Heather and Cameron endings are what the writers naturally came to, and the respective alternate endings were just made after the fact by swapping some details out. That's just speculation though. One thing I do think needs to be said is that although I don't really have many strong feelings about most of this episode, the last couple of minutes of both versions undoubtedly surpassed that of World Tour. Like, the final stretch of World Tour up until its last minute or two is legendary, but in terms of like the final minute of each season, Revenge of the Island bodies World Tour. Like, it destroys World Tour. The final 2 minutes of Revenge basically hog ties the final 2 minutes of World Tour and force feeds them to alligators. And it's all because we get to like, see the characters smiling and happy. And they didn't destroy the $1 million. Especially because they didn't destroy the $1 million. For all the crap we fling at the later seasons, one thing I'm glad they realized is that it's probably a good decision to let their victor characters win the money. I always found the whole bit of Season 1 and 3's victors having their money destroyed or scammed away to be pretty depressing, and it's good that they stopped doing that so often. Anyway, both versions of the ending finish off with the cast returning home in a much smaller boat than the initial one they came on. Chris decides to give them one last bang to remember, and he attempts to detonate a bomb that he snuck onto the craft. However, the bomb explodes right below him because Chef took it off and placed it below the dock, presumably as a way to get back at Chris for his consistent mistreatment throughout the season. Chris shrugs it off surprisingly and does his final goodbye. Well, right until he gets surrounded by the Canadian feds and is arrested for his improper disposal of hazardous chemicals. So the season finishes off with him being cooked by the cops.
Wow, could you imagine that? Being right at the finish line for something great and then being arrested right then and there? That must really suck. I couldn't even imagine. FBI, open up! Oh no! You know, a few months ago when I first started making this video, I recall talking to a fan, and I remember telling him that based on the fact that this season is so much shorter than its predecessors, this video was almost certainly going to be less than 2 hours. I mean, with so much less material, there's a pretty hard cap on how long I could go rambling, right? Right?
So that was a fucking lie.
Needless to say, I've had a lot I've needed to say. But when all's said and done, how is Total Drama Revenge of the Island really? What do I honestly think about it? Well, it's alright. It's pretty good.
I wasn't exactly surprised by this revelation, to be honest. Although I've had a rocky relationship with the season since I was a kid, it hasn't been hard to recognize that a lot of it was more about the given circumstances of the season instead of its actual content. I was mad at Revenge of the Island mostly when I wasn't watching it, and when I was mostly just mildly entertained but a bit unsatisfied. The reason this season is a non-starter for so many people is obvious. It's the new cast. The new cast is a turnoff for many, and I, along with many other fans, were quick to discard these characters as one-note, stereotypical, and generally uninteresting, while then panning focus to how good and amazing the initial 22 characters were, as if the writers wrote them in some immediate stroke of pure genius they could never replicate. And trust me, I love the Generation 1 cast, and I definitely like them more than their successors, but I think a lot of us were looking back at things with rose-tinted glasses.
What I'm about to say might tick some people off, because it challenges one of the basic axioms a lot of Total Drama fans hold closely. But I honestly believe that getting a new cast was not a bad idea.
My middle school self would be very angry if you heard me say that, but all I can say to you, 2012 Switchy, is to imagine yourself in the writer's shoes. What's your game plan for Season 4? How do you plan to keep things interesting? What arc are you going to give the characters? What's your strategy to continue the story of this well-established cast in a way that pleases everyone? A lot of people are quick to say that the show should never have introduced new characters at all without exception, but I don't see many people who have really elaborate ideas for what the writers should have done instead. Face it, writing characters for extended periods of time is hard. It's not impossible, but it's not easy either. You can tell they've really struggled to find ways to naturally keep the wheels going in the past, and some of the early season's biggest blunders come from the writers trying to keep key characters in the spotlight by ruining their acquired achievements and personal growth. Even World Tour, a season I unmistakably love, had signs of the writers struggling to think of good new material. It never seriously bothered me, but you could tell that they were trying to give a lot of new characters a new arc in that season, and in many ways they just felt compelled to throw stuff at the wall and just see what sticks. The whole DJ animal curse is goofy, and I feel like that's an obvious product of the writers trying to find a way to give a character they didn't have that many ideas for some new material. Adding on to that, I don't think it's a coincidence that 2 out of the 4 most important characters in that season are the newcomers. Neither of them had any established baggage that needed to be taken into consideration when writing. I suppose it becomes more and more difficult to easily come up with ideas for characters and their interactions as the season count increases. I'll admit this is speculation on my behalf, but I would wager the easiest and most obvious things to write came and went in Season 1. Character pairings like Gwen and Trent, or Duncan and Courtney, came naturally and had a perfect beginning, middle, and end in that season, and we know how much Action and World Tour fumbled them, but on some level, I can't blame them for it. It's hard to keep up momentum with old characters, and I would struggle a lot to come up with ideas for, what will Gwen's character arc be like in Season 46 of Total Drama? Some of the best material Revenge of the Island has is very much in part due to the fact that they had a clean slate. I'd wager that a big part of why Mike and Zoe are such a popular pairing amongst fans is because there's a story told between them that begins and ends at defined points. When compared to some of the ridiculous circumstances made to drive drama between characters in Action and World Tour, Zoki or Mai or Mikoi or whatever are quite refreshing.
So, when you let the old characters retire, or at least take a rest, you give yourself space to continue the show without having to constantly subvert their likable arcs. It's a good idea, right? Well, in theory, it is, but it has to be said that the end of Total Drama World Tour was a very bad stopping point. Very, very bad. And because of that, it was really easy for us to look at Total Drama Revenge of the Island as an unwelcome guest.
It's really easy to blame Revenge of the Island. Sometimes I'll stub my toe or break a pencil and be like, damn it, Revenge of the Island! But after all these years, I think that a lot of the things I used to blame on Revenge of the Island were a bit more complicated than I used to think. The perspective I have of the show now is very different from what it was 10 years ago. As a middle schooler, my dislike for the season was pretty straightforward. In my head, new characters were bad and old characters were good. And because Revenge of the Island had new characters, it was inherently bad and the show had jumped the shark and this season was a sign that everything was going to get worse. And to be fair, Revenge of the Island was a sign of things worse to come, but not really for the reasons I outlined. I usually try to avoid telling you guys my opinions on seasons I haven't reviewed yet, but it's very important to note that my whole more old characters equals more good thesis I had as a kid is rendered null by Total Drama All-Stars. Moreover, my whole more new characters equals more bad thesis is shot down by Redonkulous Race. I mean, seriously, All-Stars is definitive proof that old characters do not a good season make. I think a lot of my old school bad blood with this season comes primarily from the level of fear I and a lot of fans were in at the time of its premiere in the months following it that the original cast would never appear again or whatever. Because of that, I couldn't help but dislike the second generation of characters. I just wanted the originals, and anything past that felt problematic. But in the years following Revenge, it was proven that the writers don't necessarily want to completely retire legacy characters and are more than willing to include them if they have good ideas, and Revenge consequently doesn't feel as insulting. It's a lot easier to separate the season itself from the context surrounding it nowadays. I've let go of a lot of the anger I used to have. I suppose it might help that I've developed a way to channel the bubbling frustrations I've had with this show that I otherwise love into over 10 hours of in-depth YouTube content viewed by hundreds of thousands of people. That kinda helps the woes I have about what could've or should've been past. The show is what it is, the best I can do is just have a good time with it.
Although, if you can indulge me a little bit more about what could have been, I can't help but believe with every fabric of my being that this season would have been so much better if it were 26 episodes.
Undoubtedly, assuredly, the 13 episode format to me is catastrophic. Given that it's strapped for time, the season consequently becomes uber challenge focused, and there's almost no breathing room in between the game, in contrast to say, Total Drama Island. In my opinion, or at least for my personal taste, this really kills a lot of enjoyment. I guess a good way to put it, to me, is that Total Drama is what happens in between the challenges. The dialogue is easily my favorite source of humor and entertainment in the show, and that's really the first thing to go in the later seasons. I may have chuckled at a few lines here and there, but when writing this script, I wasn't in a constant war with myself trying not to give in to the temptation of including every single Sierra clip. The comedic writing really takes a dive after World Tour. The first 3 seasons had this deliciously sharp teenage cynicism that fades almost entirely in season 4, and to compensate, it feels like the writers just cranked the goofy slapstick up to 11. And listen, I'm not trying to diss the slapstick bros out there. We here at Switchy Productions love us some good slapstick and physical comedy. By all means, the world could always use more guys getting hit in the head with coconuts. But the season relies on characters getting hurt, like I rely on the words really, genuinely, honestly, and other Weasley adverbs. And the thing is, I believe that the sharper and more layered dialogue would have naturally come if the season was longer. There are pockets of interesting character interactions here, and some of the observations that come from characters like Dawn heavily allude to cast members having character traits beneath the surface that could have easily been established further given more time. There's a lot more depth to the characters than I think I originally gave the show credit for as a child. I was especially interested in the infrequent lines that implied Joe has body issues and Dakota has a serious lack of self-esteem. Though, in my own defense, pretty much all of these kinds of tidbits are usually ignored in the characters' wider arcs. Most of the show's jokes are pretty predictable and focus on the surface level traits of the cast here. I know I sound a bit like I'm trying to turn the show into like Degrassi or Euphoria or something, but the point I'm making is not that every character has to have daddy issues or some deep-rooted self-esteem problems, but that the show had inklings of these characters being a bit more than their initial exterior lets on, only for those loose threads to go almost entirely ignored. One thing I complained about earlier is the toxic waste stuff, and although I still think there are a lot of problems for me with that whole premise, I also can't help but be aware that Total Drama World Tour has a lot of the same over-the-top action, and with the exception of Ezekiel, I almost never found myself being bothered by it at all. In the past, I used to analogize the transition between Total Drama World Tour and Total Drama Revenge of the Island as similar to the transition between SpongeBob's 3rd and 4th season. But honestly, that's a really bad comparison. SpongeBob's decline was due to a major shift in personnel leading to a very obvious change in writing quality, but I don't think that's what happened with Total Drama. The crew has a pretty similar team of people, and I don't think there was any profound loss in competency. I think Total Drama Revenge of the Island ended up the way it did because they had so much less time to tell a story, and when making the choice on whether to spend their time on character writing versus crazy kooky slapstick, they chose the latter. I honestly don't think the toxic waste stuff would even bother me that much if it came in a more gently paced 26 episode package, and I think that extends to most of the other general problems I have. There still likely wouldn't have been any characters I just figuratively fell in love with like Sierra or Courtney, but I would have probably grown to enjoy characters like Joe, Dawn, and Cameron a lot more if they had more time.
So really, I think that's season 4's one true crime. It's not the toxic waste, it's not the new cast, and it's not the show becoming more formulaic. It's the runtime, and pretty much every issue I seem to have seems to be a result of the people at Fresh TV poorly adjusting to such an impactful change in the creative process.
I sometimes find myself treating the toxic waste stuff as completely mutually exclusive with a lot of the slower paced character writing you find in previous seasons, but the more I think about it, the less it seems true. If this season were given the time, I think just by necessity, the writers would tap into the kind of infectious storytelling and humor that led to antics like Beth and Chef stalling an entire challenge and nearly losing the million just because they got super into gossiping about the others and lost track of time. God, I love that scene. Action's finale is underappreciated. The only thing I think that truly pushed away the aspects of total drama I personally enjoy the most was the runtime and its consequences, and I think that's my main thesis of this whole video. Call it the redonkulous hypothesis. Not because the hypothesis is redonkulous, but because Redonkulous Race pretty much entirely proved to me how much this show benefits from a 26 episode format even later on. It may be the redonkulous hypothesis, but I think it's also quite reasonable. I mean, it's definitely funny that they insisted on calling this season bigger, badder, and brutaler, when more often than not, it feels really flash in the pan. Oh, also, one more thing to whine about, the cameos suck. I mean, Heather and Anthony Fantano were okay, but other than that, the returning cast members were profoundly uninteresting in their appearances and only succeeded in making a child version of myself wish they could ditch the newbies and stick to the old characters instead. I suppose it doesn't mean all that much, but I remember vividly getting super excited for Duncan to show up in episode 9, only to be left totally unsatisfied. They could have at least spent a little bit more time trying to make the characters funnier, or, if nothing else, a bit more than totally uninteresting caricatures of themselves.
But despite all of that, I think Revenge of the Island is, in 2023, a decent but unremarkable season. There are a lot of good ideas here, but because of its given circumstances, it wasn't really able to play to its strengths, and it had to compromise on a lot of the things that used to make this series special. But that's just my opinion. What's your opinion, Total Drama Guy?
I like Scott.
Cool.
If you're on the fence about giving this season a watch yourself, I'd say you should go for it. You probably won't enjoy it as much as you enjoyed seasons 1, 2, and 3, but it has its moments, and I absolutely disagree with the premise I sometimes hear that people should skip over it or only watch the early seasons and nothing after. It's not perfect, but I think people overstate its flaws in comparison to the other seasons.
As I've always said, thank you so much for watching this, especially to those of you who've tuned into the other videos that have led up to this point. Feel free to check out my tier list video, which I'm releasing as a companion piece to this one on my second channel. Making this video was especially interesting to me because I think I found myself learning a lot as a fan, writer, and entertainer. I came in and exited the first 3 seasons of the show with a pretty unchanged opinion, but this time around, I found myself really challenged as a critic, and I've been forced to rethink a lot of my presuppositions about total drama, and it makes me very happy that I've gotten to share this experience with you. I'll see you guys when All Stars comes around. Wait, no I won't. I didn't say that. I made no confirmation of that. At all. You're just hearing things and making stuff up to antagonize me.